an experience I've noticed receiving more and more attention lately is something called the Mandela effect. The way it's described is a collective false memory. A bunch of people remember something happened a certain way, even though every shred of evidence proves to the contrary. The name comes from Nelson Mandela, who became president of South Africa in 1994 and died in 2013. Despite these facts, a lot of people remember him dying in prison in the 80s while he was an activist fighting apartheid. There are a ton of other examples, several of which I've experienced myself. I remember the color chartreuse being a shade of pink, almost like magenta. It's greenish yellow. I definitely looked on Wikipedia to figure out when Jif peanut butter shortened its name from Jiffy. They never did. And I don't care what the internet or the books in my parents' attic suggest. It was always spelled Berenstein growing up. It was Berenstain, though the general consensus is just that boy. Human memories sure are imperfect. Another half-serious theory about these phenomena is that, at some point, people with false memories have actually crossed over from a parallel dimension almost exactly like the one they exist in now. Those dimensions are so similar, in fact, that the only difference is the one fairly minor detail in question. The Monopoly guy wears a monocle, for example. He doesn't. If someone has a bunch of false memories, by this theory it would indicate they've jumped dimensions a number of times, perhaps slightly thrown off at the inconsistency of reality with how they remember it, but otherwise unharmed. Aside from being general, easy to mistake details, the one other aspect that Mandela effect phenomena share is that people are unable to pin down the specific time that they cross dimensions. In most cases, the false memories originated years ago, often in childhood, but people can't name the instant things changed. There was one time I've experienced the Mandela effect, however, that while it comes from my childhood, I remember the exact moment the jump happened. Really, I can pin it down to a period of a minute or two. And the thing that changed, well, it wasn't a minor detail. The summer of 1994 was destined to be memorable for me, one way or another. My dad's youngest brother, Uncle John, and his wife had just had their third daughter. Their two older girls, Abby and Allison, were aged 9 and 7 respectively. To help the happy couple get adjusted to the new addition, my dad's older brother, Uncle Mike, offered to take the kids on a road trip for a couple weeks. Mike was always a bit of an eccentric, not in the least that he always drove an old Winnebago camper around as his primary mode of transportation. I don't think you could afford to do that these days, what with the price of gas, but I digress. My parents agreed, my brothers, and I should go on the trip to keep my cousins company. At 17 years old, my older brother, Danny, was along for purely practical reasons. Uncle Mike's plan was to take us up and down a good portion of the Mid-Atlantic region to visit distant family members and see some of the sights. Danny was way too old to hang out with a bunch of kids still in elementary school, but having another person along with a driver's license to spell Mike made sense. My brother David, though, I truthfully thought there was no good reason to bring him along. He was only 5, and though I certainly loved him after a fashion, in my 10-year-old mind he was the most annoying little kid in the world. I argued and argued with my mom that he shouldn't come, that he would only be a hindrance, but she made no bones about it. If I wanted to go, then David would be coming too. At last, I relented. The trip itself was amazing. We started off in Ohio, at a festival run by a distant uncle who was the pastor of a local church that had rides and cotton candy, the works. We went through Harrisburg to see Hershey Park and tour the governor's mansion, lost air conditioning on the way to the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, and spent time with some second cousins on a river ferry near Annapolis. The trip was scheduled to be 10 days long, and looking back, it's amazing the number of things we managed to see and do in that short period. The motor home itself was relatively small, as such things go. Sure, there was a small kitchenette, a table, couch, even a bathroom, but there was only one small bed situated up over the cabin. While we were all more than comfortable while driving, there was really no way the Winnebago could accommodate all 6 of us to sleep. Accordingly, my dad and Uncle John had given Uncle Mike money so we could stay at hotels along the way. Like I said, Mike was a bit of an eccentric. For one reason or another, we could only stop at Speedway stations for gas, and the only hotels he would stay at were Marriott's. At the hotels, we would always reserve 2 adjoining rooms, one for Uncle Mike and Danny, another for us 4 younger kids. In the kid room, Abby and Allison would share one bed, and that meant David and I got the other. If I thought David was the most annoying little kid in the world before the trip, well, now I was sure of it. I'd shared a room with him at home since shortly after he was born. But at least there we had separate beds. Now, his thumb sucking kept me up late into the night. Once I'd finally managed to fall asleep, I'd inevitably get woken up an hour or 2 later when he'd encroach my space, his sucking and slurping practically in my ear. It was awful, and after a week I was ready to be done with it. One last thing I need to make note of, even though the different locations we visited were awesome in and of themselves, some of the most fun us 4 younger kids had was at the hotel pools. Despite only staying at Marriott's, we were continually surprised by the varying designs at each of the franchise locations. Allison, Abby, David, and I spent hours in the pool at every stop, splashing, racing, and generally having a grand time. Our last scheduled stop was in New York City, and we got in extremely late at night. I'm not sure how many tourist groups of mostly children have walked the streets and ridden the subways of Manhattan at 2 in the morning. But on July 8, 1994, we made one more. As always, Uncle Mike had booked us rooms at a Marriott, specifically the one next to the World Trade Center. We slept in late that morning, toured the Empire State Building, and found our ancestors' registries on Ellis Island from when they came through. We had just gotten into the base of the Statue of Liberty when Uncle Mike gave us 2 options. We were due to head home the next morning, and the estimated wait to get to Lady Liberty's crown was almost 3 hours. Did we want to stay in line or go back and check out the hotel pool? The vote was unanimous. I remember among his other annoying traits, it took David an inordinately long time to change into his bathing suit. He was just getting the hang of tying knots, and it made me want to scream watching him fumble with the cord on his suit, vehemently refusing to let me help him. I told him impatiently that every minute he wasted getting ready was one less minute we had at the pool. It closed at 6, and it was already almost 5, but no matter what I said, he refused to let me tie the stupid thing for him. At last, David was ready, and we raced to the elevator with the girls. As I mentioned, despite only staying at Marriott's, we'd seen a number of different pool layouts throughout the trip. Some had diving boards, one with actual palm trees and a fake beach, but this was the first to have an honest-to-goodness water slide. Even better, this one had 3, and best of all, we appeared to be the only guests using the pool. The bottom of the slides dumped into a section that was a sort of annex to the main pool with stairs to the right that you took to get up to the top. There were 3 flights, 15 stairs each. A sign posted on the wall read, "Slide at your own risk. No lifeguard on duty." I know because every detail of that pool trip is burned indelibly into my brain. The pool itself was a pretty standard hotel affair, nothing to write home about, so of course we started at the slide. We had limited time, after all. I checked my Timex once we got to the top to see how much we had left. It read 5:02. Darn David and his ability to tie knots. There were 3 slides and 4 of us. Abby and Allison claimed the first 2, and I went to move to the 3rd. David grabbed my arm, the sort of unfounded fear in his eyes that only 5-year-olds can muster. "Wait for him," he begged me. I tugged away, left his fingers clutching only air. I told him not to be a baby, to just come down right after me. The girls had already gotten a head start, and I didn't want to be left out of the race. I threw myself down the slide. I shot out into the pool at surprising speed. It was so fast. I could tell this was going to be an amazing last day. I pulled myself out of the water using the rails on the poolside and looked at the slide expectantly. Allison and Abby were talking excitedly, already heading back up the stairs, and I thought about going with them, but a small brotherly instinct made me want to make sure David didn't need help extricating himself from the pool. I waited and waited some more. I heard twin high-pitched shrieks echoing from inside the tubes, and seconds later the girls came flying out with an enormous splash. I asked them where David was. Was he up at the top, too scared to come down on his own? My cousins both gave me a look of confusion. What was I talking about? Who was David? I thought for sure they were messing with me. I told them it wasn't funny, to stop screwing around, to be serious. Where was David? They rolled their eyes in unison, as only sisters can. They went back up the stairs, telling me they weren't going to waste pool time with dumb jokes. I stood there, dripping and flabbergasted, my eyes fixed on the slide, waiting for David to emerge from one of the tubes. I waited another 2 minutes. The girls completed another 2 runs. I didn't ask them about David again. I wasn't going to play into whatever trick they were trying to pull on me. My watch read 5:06 when I finally went back up to the top, telling myself up 3 flights and 45 stairs that I would find David waiting there, sniffling and trying not to cry, but alive and well. The entrance of the slide was completely vacant, the only sounds from the girls again hitting the water far below. I went to find Danny and Uncle Mike. They were sitting in their room, watching something on the television. Now I was the one barely holding back tears. Danny sat up concernedly on the bed. Uncle Mike rushed to where I stood in the doorway asking what was wrong, if I'd gotten hurt. It took me a minute to gain my composure, to haltingly explain that I had somehow lost my little brother. Neither of them knew who I was talking about. I sort of lost it then, screaming, thrashing. Where was he? Why was everyone being so mean? Danny awkwardly tried to give me a hug, but I pushed his arms away. No, I screamed. Where was David? Uncle Mike picked up the phone on the nightstand between the 2 beds. He told me I was freaking him out, but that if it would help, we could call my parents. I yelled at him to do it. Abby and Allison peered through the door, eyes wide, wrapped in towels, about the time the connection went through. My mom's voice was concerned as she asked me what was going on, but it had an instant calming effect on me. Everyone was being terrible, I told her. David was missing, and no one would help me find him. She got quiet for a few long moments, then told me not to worry and to put Uncle Mike back on the phone. He talked to her for a couple minutes, softly so I couldn't hear, periodically casting glances to where I was sitting on the bed, before finishing the conversation and letting me say goodbye. My mom told me to do what Uncle Mike and Danny said, that she'd see me soon, but that David was fine, that I would see when I got home. I got changed in the same bathroom that not an hour ago I'd argued with David to let me help tie his bathing suit. We quickly packed up the Winnebago and left. Abby and Allison stayed together on the sofa at the back of the camper, watching me nervously while I sat at the little table in the kitchenette. I didn't say a word the entire 8-hour drive home. It was after midnight, and Uncle Mike had barely rolled the camper to a stop in our driveway when I jumped out, rushing to the back door where my mom stood, bathrobe held clutched around her. My dad waited anxiously behind her. Where was David? I asked her. Was he all right? Gently she took my hand and led me into the house back towards our room. When we entered, my jaw literally dropped. Everything was changed. My loft bed was still there, sure, but underneath, where David's twin bed usually resided, sat a desk covered in drawings I'd done and a small bookcase bursting with Bruce Coville paperbacks and Star Wars novels. My mom told me it had been a very long, busy trip, and that I needed to get some sleep in my own bed. She said everything would be better in the morning, but that if it wasn't she could call to make me an appointment with a doctor. She told me that either way I shouldn't worry, that everything would be alright. I felt something drop in my chest, just above my stomach, heavy as a stone. I fell to my knees as a gut-wrenching sob ripped from my throat, and I started shaking so hard that I couldn't manage to stop. Heartbreak and pain and guilt tore through me as I cried uncontrollably, and I think my mind broke a little bit. The next day was the weekend, but my mom managed to call around and find a counselor with weekend hours. His name was Mr. Calabrese, but he let me call him Mr. C, and I had sessions with him twice a week for 5 years. We talked about a lot of different things, though David came up a lot for obvious reasons. Mr. C helped show me that there was no way my entire family had conspired to trick me, that they loved me, that somehow the memories I had of David were fake. The times when he wanted to play his stupid kiddie games or accidentally broke my toys had never happened. Neither had the ones when he was little and had been scared in his crib at night, when I would reach down from my loft bed so he could stand and just barely grab my fingers with his own. My memories of the feeling of his hand in mine weren't real, and neither was he. I've lived a generally happy, productive life since the trip. I went to college, got married, have a couple kids of my own. I still stay in touch with my parents. And Danny, dare I say it, we're very close. We take turns visiting for holidays, go on vacations to Disney World, the whole shebang. Uncle Mike died of a stroke in 2018, so that sucked. Uncle John, his wife, Abby Allison, and their little sister Anna are still doing well though. My mom waited a good many years to bring it up, mostly because I think she was trying hard not to upset me or mess with my therapy. But long enough down the road one night she told me that she and my dad had tried for a third kid for years after me and had even gotten pregnant when I was 4. She had lost the child at 8 weeks. If it was a boy, they were going to name him David. Someone reading this account might argue my story isn't an example of the Mandela effect. After all, by definition, the experience is a collective false memory shared by a bunch of people. To that I'd say, last Christmas I was visiting my parents and went to midnight mass with them. After the service, I happened to be talking to a woman a few years younger than me whose family my parents have known for the better part of 30 years. She asked me how my brother David was doing, that she hadn't seen him since their 8th grade graduation. It took me a second to answer, but I told her he was fine and left it at that. I thought it would just be easier, instead of having to explain, if the alternate explanation for the Mandela effect is in fact the real one, that these memories are not actually false, but that those who hold them are in fact cross-dimensional travelers. Then David is out there somewhere. I wonder at times, was I the one who crossed dimensions, or was he? The Marriott in New York we stayed at was destroyed along with most of the rest of the World Trade Center complex during the terrorist attack on 9/11, so even if I would want to go back now and check things out as an adult to see if I can find evidence of tachyons or wormholes or whatever, I couldn't. I did manage to find one picture of the pool slide, or at least one exactly like I remember it, but the hotel and everything around it is gone. To David, wherever you are, I hope you know that you are loved. I hope someday, as remote a chance as it may be, I cross back over to another dimension with you in it. I hope it's one you get to meet your niece and nephew. I hope there I made a different choice and we went down that slide together. I hope it's one where we both came out the other side. I had always liked driving alone at night. It gave me time to think, or to not think if I so chose. Because of my love for driving, the midnight trip home was one of my favorite parts about going to see my family. The drive was about an hour long, which was long enough for me to unwind, but short enough to not feel exhausting. Call me old-fashioned, but I really enjoyed listening to the radio while I drove as well. I'd tune into whatever the local station happened to be playing, as I zoned out while watching the reflective yellow lines on the road pass rapidly by me. There often weren't but a handful of cars traveling along this stretch of highway so late into the night, and this gave me a sense of solitude. But I liked it. It was meditative in a way. One night when I was returning home from a visit with the folks, I was enjoying the trip the same as I always had. The skies were almost completely dark, with just a thin sliver of moon and scattered stars peeking through the black. The radio was playing some old jazz song, and there wasn't a single soul sharing the road with me. It was peaceful, but just as I was sighing in contentment, the smooth and calming sounds of the jazz radio abruptly cut off into a roaring static. Damn, I hissed to myself as my hand quickly shot to the radio to turn it down. I now sighed in frustration, annoyed that my peace had been broken so suddenly. After messing with the dial for a moment, and failing to get the radio signal back, I decided to pull out my phone and try to connect it to my car's speakers so that I'd still have something to listen to. But after rummaging through my jacket pocket in search of the device, I at last pulled it out only to find that the battery had died. I had a bad habit of not keeping the thing charged, and now it was biting me in the ass. Welp, guess I'm screwed if I get into a wreck. I jabbed at myself, irritated that I hadn't thought to charge it at my family's place. With little other choice, I accepted that the remainder of my trip would be one without music to keep me company. After a few minutes, I became curious as to exactly how much of a drive was left. I checked the clock to see that it read 12:34. Remembering leaving my parents' house just a bit after midnight, I concluded that there was roughly a half an hour left before I'd arrive home. Sighing deeply in frustration again, I resigned myself to focus on the road ahead of me. The painted, yellow lines of the road crawled quickly into the view of my headlights. And underneath the hood of my car, I watched them carefully for a while, my mind struggling to remain focused. When finally lifting my gaze back up to the road, an odd feeling of anxiety came over me. Maybe it was just the lack of music to occupy my thoughts, but I couldn't help but feel like the darkness that engulfed my vehicle was a little too thick. I wasn't able to make out any of the usual trees or landscape that surrounded the highway, nor could I see the stars in the sky. I thought back to when I'd started my journey home, and distinctly remembered admiring the pinpricks of light when I first got on the highway, but I didn't recall seeing any clouds or oncoming storms that would otherwise block them from view now. The feeling gnawed at my psyche for a bit, but I shook it off as best as possible. I told myself there was nothing to worry about. Soon I'd arrive at my exit, and not long after that I'd be home. Checking the time again, I furrowed my brow in confusion. The clock still read 12:34. That was strange. I knew it had been at least a few minutes since I'd last checked. Oh great, I said to myself. I guess the clock is broken. Still, I didn't think much of this at the time, knowing I probably only had about 10 minutes or so left on the highway before my exit. I decided I would worry about recalibrating the clock when I got home. With no other choice, I continued driving like nothing was wrong, ignoring the creeping feeling that was slowly working its way up my spine. More time passed, and I found myself glancing toward the edge of the road for a sign. I didn't normally pay much attention to the exits prior to my own, but I couldn't remember seeing even a single exit sign for quite a while. Still, I kept onward, trying to convince myself that I was just tired and was just misjudging the amount of time that had gone by. Finally, after what felt like well over half an hour, I saw a sign approaching in the distance. As I got closer, I could see that it was a large green sign that read, "Exit 181, 1 mile." I sighed in relief, knowing that meant I was almost at my exit. Exit 182, just a couple more miles, and I'd be nearly home. After a minute or so, another sign came into view with a road that spanned right off of the highway. Exit 181, next right, it read. I passed by it, unthinking, my legs beginning to shake as the anxiety that had been chewing at the edges of my mind became harder to ignore. Then, a moment later, another sign approached from a distance. A little reassured, I slowed down a bit in preparation to get off the highway. But as I got close enough to read the sign, I found myself feeling confused rather than relieved. The sign read, Exit 181, 1 mile. Speeding past the sign, my sense of anxiety began morphing into one of dread. I could have sworn I'd already passed exit 181, so how was it possible that I'd passed it again? Before my panic could rise to a peak, I steeled myself and decided I must have just misread the previous sign. So this time when I passed the sign reading, exit 181, next right, I made sure to read the number carefully so that I was certain it was 181. It was indeed, I was sure of it. So as the next, identical, green sign came into view only a moment later, the words, "What the hell?" escaped my lips in the form of a scared whimper. I slammed on my brakes, my tires making an obnoxious screech against the road as they burned rubber. Sitting there on the middle of the highway, I stared up at the sign for what I was certain by now was the third time. The metal shook slightly from the wind as it towered over me, returning my confused phrase with words of its own. Exit 181, 1 mile. I did nothing for a moment but sit and read those words over and over and over in a pale attempt to register them. But with nothing else to do, I slowly pressed on the gas and continued driving forward. My leg now shook rapidly with anxiety. As I tried to steady my breathing, the words, Exit 181, echoed through my mind as I approached the exit yet again, and as the road that broke from the highway passed me by once more, I found myself on the verge of a panic attack. By now, I knew for a fact that I'd passed this exit more than once. Surely I wasn't losing my mind, was I? In the end, it didn't make much of a difference. I was on the middle of the highway at night with a dead cell phone. What else could I do but keep driving? So that's what I did, and all the while fear pressed on my chest like an increasing collection of stones. Just as the anxiety was beginning to suffocate me, static suddenly erupted from the radio, filling the inside of my car with a loud squeal. What the hell? I yelled as my hand instinctively reached for the volume dial again. But just as I touched it, the static of the radio was replaced with a voice. I listened for a few seconds as the gargled speech became more clear. "Thank you, listener, for joining us on this beautiful evening," were the first words I could make out. I listened on. "If you're just joining us, we've got a great collection of classics coming up. But first, a word from our sponsors. Redacted is a beautiful place filled with beautiful people. I don't think there's a place on earth more lovely. If you're looking for a great, old-fashioned community with like-minded folks, come on down and visit us sometime here in Redacted." It sounded like the radio was trying to sell some kind of tourist attraction or town, but each time the name was said, static burst through the speakers. The radio DJ continued, "Just take exit 181 and join our community. Now back to the music." As if on cue, a familiar sign came into view. "No," I yelled in frustration as the words etched upon it were the same ones echoed on the radio. "Exit 181, 1 mile. What the hell is going on?" I yelled, slamming my hands into the steering wheel in anger and panic. Now the damn radio wants me to take this exit? Well, hell no. Where's my exit? Where's exit 182? I screamed at the radio, half expecting a response, but only static buzzed in response to my angry questioning. Becoming frantic, I pressed down on the gas pedal, accelerating well beyond the speed limit as I stared daggers at exit 181 when passing by it again. I looked out at the endless stretch of blackness that lay beyond my headlights, grinding my teeth as I did so. No matter how I tried to rationalize the situation, it seemed impossible. I'd never experienced any sort of psychotic break before, but it was the only reasonable explanation. As I tried to keep my heart rate under control, a loud buzzing screamed through the speakers in my car, and I once more heard the radio DJ's voice blare throughout my four-wheeled prison. Unlike the cheery persona from before, however, the tone of his voice had a darkness to it. Thon was the cheerful and inviting persona that had invited me to his home, and in its place was something I could only describe as malevolent. He didn't say anything directly violent, but I could feel the threat at the end of each word as it hissed through the speakers. "You want to come to Redacted? It's the happiest place in the world. The sun is always shining, and the people are always smiling, so make the right choice. Take exit 181. His last words were slow and deliberate, resembling more of a demand than a request, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was talking to me directly. A chill ran up my spine at the thought. But that couldn't be possible, could it? Then again, how was any of this possible? I had been driving on the same span of highway for hours by now and passed the same exit multiple times. And now the damn radio was talking to me, telling me to make the only choice I seemed to have. But I got the feeling that this town I was being coerced to visit wasn't as friendly as the DJ made it sound. I wasn't sure if it was a mental break or not, but whatever was going on, I knew that I wasn't going to take exit 181. When I went by the sign signifying that it was 1 mile away again, I didn't bother looking at it. Instead, I just pushed on the gas more. As the exit itself grew nearer once again, the radio crackled to life once more. But before it had the chance to say anything, I muted it, speeding past 181 like a bat out of hell. A mix of defiance and bravery came over me, but that courage was deflated as soon as the radio somehow cranked itself back up, and a familiar voice broke through again. "You think you can just ignore me?" The radio DJ spat angrily with a startling intensity. "You can't keep driving forever, so just take the exit. It's your only way out. And you know it, so do it. Turn right at exit 181. Take the exit. Do it. Take it. Take exit 181. Take the X." I cut off the screaming voice of the DJ as I tore the radio from its console, throwing it on the floor of the passenger's side, all while returning the screaming with some of my own. What the hell, is all I could choke out with my now hoarse vocal cords. I began hyperventilating as I practically pushed my gas pedal through the floor. My car was moving so fast at this point that I had trouble maintaining control of the wheel, but I didn't care. I hoped, prayed even, that if I just drove fast enough, I'd eventually reach exit 182 or even 183. I didn't care what it was as long as it wasn't exit 181. But despite my dangerously insane speed, nothing changed. I flew by the abhorrent exit over and over again so many times that I'd lost count. The radio DJ was right, I couldn't go forever. While I still had a decent amount of fuel, I was completely aware, even in my panic, that eventually it would run out. That being said, it felt like there was little else I could do, so I just drove on, beating my steering wheel in a frenzied state as the hopelessness of my situation slowly wrapped its gnarled appendages around my psyche. It was when only a shred of my mind remained that my peripheral vision caught something in my rear view mirror, pulling me back to reality. Lights, flashing red and blue. It was a police car. Damn, I said, immediately taking my foot off the gas and doing my best to brake from the outrageously high velocity I'd been traveling. For a moment, a new panic rose in my chest, but then I realized, wait, a cop, another person. I knew I might be facing a harsh punishment for criminal speeding, but at least I had another human on this damn road with me at long last. By the time I had slowed to a reasonable speed, the car had already caught up with me. Putting on my hazards, I pulled off to the edge of the road and tried to think of how I'd explain all this to the officer. They pulled up behind me, the reflection of their bright lights nearly blinding me as they parked uncomfortably close to my own vehicle. A few seconds later, a door slammed, and the crunch of dirt underneath boots echoed ominously as the officer approached my window. The form outside my car was tall, so much so that I couldn't see its head while it was standing so close to my vehicle. I sat staring vacantly for a moment, wondering if it was safe before they began tapping on my window to get my attention. Quickly snapping back to reality, I rolled it down so that I could speak to them, and the deep voice of a man broke through the chilly night air. "Ma'am, do you have any idea how fast you were going?" the officer asked. In an intimidating tone, I swallowed tears and did my best to respond. "Officer, I'm sorry, but something really weird is happening," I began, but was cut off. "License and registration, please," he said sternly. I began going through my glove compartment in search of the requested documents, but continued trying to explain myself. As I did, "Yes, sir, but please, you have to listen to me. I've been stuck on this stretch of highway for hours," I said, trying not to sound too exasperated. "Going that speed. Lady, you'd better explain yourself." He responded incredulously, "No, you don't understand." I tried to reason. "I keep passing the same exit over and over and over again." "Ma'am, what in the hell are you talking about? Have you been drinking tonight?" he asked accusingly. "No, I've been stuck in some sort of loop. Driving by the same exit repeatedly. I can't get to my exit. It's like something is trying to keep me from my exit." "Sure, what exit did you say you've been trying to get to?" he asked in an almost mocking tone. "Exit 182, I replied. "Exit 182, he asked. "Well, that's your problem, ma'am. You're going to the wrong place." I stopped, looking back at his gaunt, towering form in confusion. "What do you mean?" I asked, paranoia beginning to choke me once more. He slowly bent down, his impossibly tall form collapsing like a skyscraper as he brought his face level to the window to meet my petrified gaze. I let out an involuntary gasp, as what I previously thought to be a man stared into me with a crazy expression. The thing's features were awful. It was like some animal had ripped the flesh from a human male and adorned their face like a cheap Halloween costume. The skin stretched and warped in horrible ways around the bony, bulbous structure beneath it. Its eyes were too big for the holes of the mask, and the sockets tore and contorted around the bulging, sickly yellow sclere. But worst of all were its teeth. Large and jagged like that of an anglerfish, they shredded through the meat that surrounded the false lips of the thing, causing the pink flesh to smack together grotesquely as the twisted, mangled thing pretending to be human spoke once more. "There's only one place for you to go, ma'am. Exit 181. A scream of abject terror escaped my lips as the engine of my car simultaneously screeched to life. I pulled away from the monstrosity as fast as I could, my foot putting the pedal to the metal and leaving a cloud of dust in my wake. "Oh damn, holy hell," I yelled in a panic, pounding the steering wheel hard with my fist as each word scratched its way painfully out of my throat. My vehicle roared down the black stretch of highway at over 100 miles per hour. Its dated engine sputtered and shook, rattling the frame of the car violently. I had just started to let up on the gas when something caught my eye in the rear view mirror again. The red and blue lights were back and quickly catching up to me. I began hyperventilating as the realization hit me. That imposter was chasing me, and it wouldn't be long before it caught up with my old junker of a vehicle. Immediately, I pressed my foot hard against the gas pedal again, like I was trying to push it through the floor. I watched as the speedometer crept back to over 100 at a torturously slow rate. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked back in the mirror to see the lights getting closer. "Damn it, go faster, you piece of trash," I screamed at my car. The engine began to rattle again, but I didn't care. My foot remained planted on the gas even as the steering wheel became difficult to control. As I desperately tried to increase the distance between myself and the false police officer, I glanced frantically at each road sign as I accelerated past them. Exit 181, 1 mile. Exit 181, next right. Exit 181, 1 mile. Exit 181, next right. Exit 181, 1 mile. Exit 181, next right. Each time I read the words, my anxiety rose higher and higher until I wanted to scream. But no matter how many times I passed the signs, the words upon them remained the same. Exit 181, 1 mile. Exit 181, next right. The red and blue lights were so close now that they began to illuminate the inside of my car, and I could hear the sirens wailing at near deafening levels just behind me. No sooner than I realized this, the radio erupted in harsh static which nearly made me lose my grip on the wheel. The damn thing wasn't even hooked in anymore, yet somehow the furious voice of the DJ crackled through my car at a volume that threatened to blow my speakers, and began screaming expletives at me. "Take the exit now. You're nothing but a disgusting shell. You'll never be anything, so take the exit. Take exit 181. Take the exit now." The howling insults continued and I screamed in agony and confusion in response, matching the volume of both the radio and sirens in a crescendo of madness. Suddenly, my cries caught in my throat as the red and blue police lights became visible in my side mirror. With horror, my head twisted at a nearly bone-snapping speed to see the imposter's car was now tearing down the road in the left lane, its front tires even with my own. I gazed with a silent scream at the abomination that sat behind the wheel as it returned my petrified expression with a twisted, sinister smile. Then, with no other warning, he twisted his wheel, causing the police car to slam into the side of mine. My tires screeched against the road as I struggled to maintain control of my car. Meanwhile, the radio continued violently berating me. "Take the exit, now. Take it or die, you waste of space." In the chaos, I desperately tried to focus my attention back on the road in front of us only to see the same words I'd now read 100 times reflect the glow of my headlights. Exit 181, 1 mile. I took in a long, deep breath and turned to face the skin-wearing monster in the neighboring lane again. Tears fell hotly down my cheeks as my gaze pleaded with it. The creature, still smiling through the torn flesh of its human mask, nodded slowly and expectantly at me. It knew as well as I did that there was only one way for this to go. Removing my foot from the gas, I began to slow down, and so too did the imposter officer. I returned my attention back to the endless road that stretched in front of me. The abyss that surrounded my headlights remained as thick as ever as the small, dim reflection of green became slowly visible in the distance. Tears and snot continued to fall from my face as I prepared myself for whatever exit 181 had in store for me. I didn't understand what this was, but it was obvious to me at this point that no matter how long I drove forward, there was only exit 181 awaiting me. "Wait a second," I said to myself, as a thought occurred to me. I looked around my vehicle to observe my surroundings more deeply. All that lay in front of me was the same stretch of road, but I couldn't actually see anything but the same black fog that sat at the sides of the highway until my headlights illuminated the space. Was it possible that I wasn't just driving through some abyss? Maybe this was still like any other highway, and if it was, that meant there were two directions that could be taken. As soon as the idea came to me, I kicked myself for the stupidity of it. Nothing about this situation made any sense, so there was a much better chance that I was wrong, and that if my tires left the road, I'd simply fall into the void that lay beyond them. Still, the more I considered my options, the less the alternative sounded preferable. If it was between spending my life with abominations like the one in the police car, and simply floating in the void until starvation took me, it wasn't a difficult choice. I wasn't going to do what these monsters wanted. I wasn't going to do what the signs wanted. If I was going out, I decided it would be on my terms. Looking at the sign as it grew nearer, I furrowed my brow in resolve. Exit 181 was approaching me again, but this would be the last time I would read those damn words. I made sure to keep up the act, and began slowing my vehicle more, even throwing my turn signal on as the abhorrent exit grew closer. Taking in a deep breath once more to steady myself, I glared back at the imposter, its vehicle still keeping pace with my own, its expression now less menacing, but still horrifying, nodded at me once more. Then, as the exit approached for the final time, I slammed on my brakes without warning. The smell of burning rubber filled my nostrils. As the seatbelt dug sharply into my collarbone, the police car tried to react to my drastic shift in speed, but it was obvious that the creature driving it was caught off guard. As a result, its vehicle sputtered and twisted its front end to the right, toward exit 181, as it too came to a screeching halt. My car, however, twisted in the opposite direction as I poured every ounce of my strength into jerking the wheel to the left. The imposter attempted to maneuver its fake police car to compensate for my abrupt change in direction, but it was too late. As soon as my steering wheel stopped turning, I floored the gas pedal. The engine of my old car roared, and its tires once again cried against the asphalt beneath me. I took one last look at the sign poking through the abyss in my rearview mirror. Then, my car tore me away from it, and toward the empty blackness on the other side of the road. I closed my eyes and prepared myself for the feeling of falling off the sheer cliff that I'd expected, but instead, my car began rattling as it took on rough terrain. My eyes shot open in surprise as I realized I was now driving on the rocky gravel median that sat between the two opposing directions of highway. I gripped the wheel hard, bracing from the bumpy earth below. After just a few seconds, more asphalt became illuminated in my headlights, and I twisted my wheel to the left as my tires bumped back onto the road. Without thinking, I immediately floored the gas again, now racing down the highway in the opposite direction of where I had left the false police officer. The radio crackled with more expletives for a moment. "Where do you think you're going?" "Get back here, come." Then, suddenly, it cut off, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I looked back in my rearview mirror, expecting to see the sirens chasing me, but there was nothing but an empty stretch of road behind me. As I searched my surroundings for any sign of the imposter, I slowly began to recognize them. Gone was the empty darkness that had previously swallowed what lay beyond the edges of the road. In its wake were trees, grass, and distant mountains. Turning my gaze to the sky, I saw the sliver of moon hanging in its center, surrounded by stars which dimly illuminated the landscape around me. Confused and still on edge, I let out a shaky breath. But only a moment later, a familiar sign could be seen coming up in the distance. My heart rate immediately shot into my throat as I approached it, feeling on the verge of another panic attack. Despite my returning fear, I dared to read the words painted upon the metallic green plate. Exit 182, 1 mile. My eyes welled up with relief. Somehow, someway, I was free. I had escaped whatever nightmare loop I'd been stuck in for hours. When the exit approached, exit 182 I hesitated for just a second. Being out of energy, and nearly out of gas, however, I made the decision to take the exit. To my great relief, every road from then on out was completely normal, and only a few minutes after exiting the highway I found myself sitting in front of my home. It was weeks before I got behind the wheel after that. I even made some excuse with my job so they would let me telework for a while. It wasn't until a few months later that I finally struck up the courage to go and visit my family again. When I did, I took the long way to get there in order to avoid the highway. And now I make sure to always drive back home before dark. In fact, I never drive on that stretch of highway anymore or at night when I can help it. I've since developed an anxiety disorder related to driving. My therapist and medication help me to cope, but I still hate driving with every ounce of my being. I don't think I'll ever truly understand what happened to me, and I don't think I want to. All I know is that I'll never take that stretch of highway again, and no matter where I go, I'll never take exit 181. There's a lot of dark things in this world that many people don't know about. These things don't care about us. They don't care about our lives. To them, we are just pests running around in their land. You see, I'm part of a cryptid task force. We're pretty well funded and have the best gear and training money can buy. A lot of the guys here are former Tier 1 operators from all over the world. Some SAS, MARSOC, Delta, PJ, Spetsnaz, you get the idea. Our job is to be the wall that separates their world from ours. We get deployed to various areas where there is a surge in cryptid activity, number of missing hikers, or campers spiking. We get sent in, strange sightings, we investigate. More often than not, our encounters are to neutralize the threat above all else. And trust me, we've adopted a pretty simple yet catchy motto here: nothing bullets cannot cure. Now I'm going to be straight up. I do not recommend anyone to go hunting for any of these things. This isn't a movie or a TV show. These things will kill you, eat you, and defecate you out without hesitation. You do not know how many wannabe cryptid hunters we've had to scrape up while we're dealing with an active target. Also, just as a side note, being in this task force doesn't mean you get to encounter every single cryptid. There's many I haven't engaged that other teams have had the fate of dealing with. Now here's a little about me. Spent some time in Force Recon, been around the world, seen my fair share of stuff and how brutal we as a species can get. And trust me, that stuff stays with you. After I did my time, I decided to get into private contracting. One thing led to another, and through word of mouth I ended up in this outfit. On to what I feel many of you are waiting for. Where I'm stationed at the moment, the main groups I deal with are werewolves and stag, deer people. Lately these groups have been quiet, with the deer people being the most peaceful of the two. The werewolves, we've been able to create a set of boundaries with them. You see, the werewolves themselves, when not transformed, are off-the-grid type of individuals. They've told us they would keep to themselves and help police their own if any try to cross the line. Lately though, we've been hearing that there have been sightings of large bipedal creatures skulking the outskirts of towns bordering the forest. Missing persons, and even one story from a family to their local PD about how their children witnessed their father being dragged away by the dog people. We decided to pay the local alphas a visit. It was an 8-man team, with a platoon-sized force on standby as QRF in case things went south. We loaded up into our MRAP and drove off into the forest. It was a quiet ride, save for the occasional story or joke being tossed around. I myself was nodding off and catching up on some extra hours of sleep before being nudged awake by the feeling of the vehicle coming to a stop. The hatch opened and we all moved out and set up a perimeter. We were in front of a makeshift shanty town made out of abandoned RVs and mobile homes. As we approached them, we spotted movement through one of the windows. Our CO told us to stand down and walked forward with his hands up. He only took 10 steps before a man built like the Terminator stepped out from one of the mobile homes. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my grip on my weapon tightened. The air was filled with tension as we watched as our commanding officer looked up at this giant, then laughed. The man laughed as well, and they embraced each other with a firm handshake, with an audible, "How have you been, you bastard?" being heard. I relaxed a bit, as did the rest of the team. The man beckoned us all closer, with our CO nodding that it was all clear. We found out that apparently there has been a pack of younger werewolves running about, causing havoc, and disturbing the peace of the general area, and trying to gain strength, which connects them to a string of missing individuals. We reported back to base, and we along with 3 other teams were tasked with ASA our opus deep into the pack's territory. Our secondary objective was to subdue or neutralize the younger pack. To be honest, I was hoping to talk these guys down, but knowing that this pack was filled with hotheads trying to make a name for themselves as the new big bad on the block, I doubt we were going to be able to. At 17:45 hours we moved out, pushing past the boundaries placed by the treaty some years ago. It was unnerving to say the least. Don't get me wrong, we are all solid guys, each seeing our share of chaos and brutality that would swallow the soul of a regular individual. But this wasn't storming an insurgent stronghold or securing a VIP. One wrong move, and the entire op could go upside down and a lot of good men would die. That's when our vehicle got hit. MRAPs are designed to take IEDs like a champ and keep rolling until the occupants are out the kill zone. But I don't think they accounted for the factor of nearly 300 pounds of pure muscle slamming into it at 35 to 50 miles per hour. It sent our vehicle tumbling onto its side, and me hanging on for dear life. In the initial days of recovering from the impact, I heard the metal on the back door straining, then saw it come flying right off. The beast then peeked its head in and eyed all of us, as if picking from a large dinner table. Its bright yellow eyes locked onto mine and I froze. I couldn't bring my weapon up, nor could I call out. All I could do was lay there as this hulking monstrosity reached for me. Gunfire rang out, and I saw the impact of 3 rounds into its lower abdomen. It howled and stumbled back. RCO had his sidearm out, and he pumped the last 7 rounds into its upper chest and face. It fell onto the dirt road, writhing in pain, smoke visibly coming out of the entry points. Fun fact, our rounds are silver-tipped, and for our sidearms, silver-tipped hollow points filled with holy ash. We exited the vehicle and watched as our commander, I'll call him Conrad, dispatched the bastard with 2 rounds from his rifle to the dome. That's when the gunfire started ringing out in the distance, and the howls. The radio in the MRAP came to life with a frantic voice on the net. This is Wolfpack 3-6 to Apache Flight. Confirm call sign. Wolfpack 3-6, this is Black Raven over. Solid copy, Black Raven. Request air support at these coordinates. All units in the area. Message follows. Nirvana. I say again, Nirvana. Damn it, Black Raven, we need support. Copy that, coming in hot. They're closing. Oh God. Oh God. Jesus Christ. The gunfire reached a crescendo, only to be drowned out by the sound of a hellfire impacting the area. We sat there in stunned silence, looking at one another before Conrad interjected, Swayhander, this is Hunter Actual. All bodies accounted for. We are still Oscar Mike to objective. How copy? Swayhander to Hunter Actual. Solid copy on all. Be advised, Wolfpack is down. Rendezvous with Eagle and Dragoon 3 clicks from your position. Solid copy, Swayhander. Hunter Actual out. Conrad looked at us all. Keep your head on a swivel, boys. We're in their country now. Needless to say, the hellfire probably helped our rendezvous with Eagle and Dragoon more than anything. After grouping up into a sizable force, we pushed forward, locating the lair of the pack. They were holed up in a cave with makeshift barricades around the entrance. We set up positions around it, our COs drawing up a plan to neutralize the hostiles and hopefully save any of the missing people taken over the past week if they weren't turned. That's when we saw someone walk out. He looked no older than 19, but he walked as if he was better than us. He stood at the entrance, with several others coming up behind him. He called out to us, "All right, we know why you're here, and trust me, you don't want to mess with us. We can take all of you out easily. There are more of us than you in here. Too many bodies for your bullets." As per protocol, our retort was for him and his compatriots to stand down, come in for questioning and judgment by the Elder Alphas, and to release anyone they held captive. The look on the kid's face was one of disgust and contempt, as if we bruised his ego. He flicked us off and crouched down on all fours and began to transform. Idiot, I thought. Before he could even finish, a shot rang out. A silver-tipped round impacted his forehead, splitting it like a melon. The silence that followed was unnerving. The other individuals looked at his body, then at us, and dropped to their knees, hands in the air. Conrad looked at me, motioning for me and several others to move in, secure and search the compound. I got up and moved, my rifle leveled and ready, moving swiftly towards them, heel to toe, heel to toe. I got a good look at them, all kids. Some were crying, others were shocked into silence as we zip-tied them. After they were secured, we moved into the cave itself. I tossed a flare in, shouting out, "CRT, anyone in here?" We got a response, albeit a weak one. We moved to the sound and found our missing individuals. All 8 of them, 5 males, 3 females, all obviously shook up and in need of aid. We moved them out onto waiting MRAPs heading back to base. From what we gathered, we killed the head honcho of the pack, and their strongest members were taken out by the Hellfire. The survivors we questioned all said that the kidnapped individuals were set to be turned and added to their numbers. We recovered the bodies of Wolfpack and gave them the burial they deserved. That's all I can say for now. I gotta go. We got reports of something big happening and command needs all hands on deck. Take care, all of you, and remember, nothing bullets cannot cure. Hey all, I hope everyone has been well and safe since my last post. Boy, do I have a story to tell. Did I ever mention how much I hate wannabe cryptid hunters? You know the type, they read about cryptids on forums, watch a bunch of online videos, and then decide, hey, I'm gonna go out with my hunting rifle and hunt one down. Yeah, those guys. I remember telling you all we had something big going down. It was a mess. Now let me get down to the details. The perimeter guards caught one of the deer people coming toward our compound. It wasn't uncommon, they would pass by, interact with us, and quietly go about their business. Only this time it was carrying a bundle in its arms. The guard slowly strode up to it, then quickly radioed into command about her find. Apparently, the bundle was its offspring. Dead from a gunshot wound. The deer people are a very neutral group. They stay in heavy isolation at times, often nervous and weary of humans. It took us quite some time to build up a bond with them. They understand our language, which helps immensely with communication and peaceful relocation when they wander too far. From what was described to us, its child was simply exploring its surroundings, albeit a bit far from their habitat, but the herd was close in case anything happened. According to the head of the herd, the air smelt wrong, as if an outsider had arrived, but before he could figure out what was happening, a shot rang out. He and several other males made their way as fast as they could to the area where the sound originated from and found 2 humans standing over the child. The humans in question fled the scene when they saw the large group of deer people congregating. They came to us immediately, hoping we could find the humans that did this. The base commander, call sign Swayhander, sent them on their way and reached out to the local contacts he had. What was relayed back to us was concerning to say the least. Apparently, there was a large group of hunters coming through, and the other day 2 were seen muttering about how they found a herd of wendigos. Since then, the group decided to pack up and move. We launched a UAV to scout the area and found a large heat signature deep in the forest. Upon closer examination, we found a makeshift encampment, complete with barricades and fighting positions. We mobilized as soon as possible, with Hunter team taking point. We inserted 4 clicks from the encampment and moved in on foot under the cover of darkness. Our objective was to recon the area, observe, and if possible impede the group's operational capabilities. As we neared the encampment, the smell of fresh blood filled the air. Conrad held up his fist, and we crouched down. Ahead of us was the hunter encampment, but there was no noise, no bustle of activity whatsoever. He opened his palm and slowly gestured forward, and as one we slowly approached the camp. As we got closer, it became more apparent as to what happened. There were body parts everywhere, spent shell casings, splatters of blood on barricades, vehicles, and the grass. It was a massacre. We fanned out, examining everything. We noticed the scattered piles of shell casings meant they were firing in all directions, with no clear target. I was confused. This was far from werewolf territory, and the deer people were nowhere near this area, and are completely peaceful. I looked at Conrad, who just stood there, looking at it all. I could tell the gears were turning his head, trying to make sense of this. I was trying as well, but I couldn't shake the feeling in the air. The feeling like we didn't belong, the sense of primal dread gnawing at my very soul. I was shaken out of my trance by Conrad barking orders for us to form up and set up a defensive perimeter. He was frantic, pacing up and down like a madman. He cupped the side of his headset and started to halfway speak and shout. I never saw this stoic leader of mine lose his cool before like he did now. Swayhander, this is Hunter Actual. Be advised, Algonquin, all units on the net message follows. Algonquin, my blood ran cold and my heart dropped. Algonquin was code word for Wendigo. Command ran us through the rumors of Wendigo sightings and even beefed up our patrols, but we didn't find anything. In the corner of my eye I saw a flash of movement. I turned and leveled my rifle, focusing on a tree far from the encampment. I cocked my head to the side, then backed up, noticing a pair of red eyes. Contact, I yelled, flipping the safety off my rifle, and opened fire, backing up. The rounds impacted the tree, the third hitting the creature behind the tree, causing it to howl. The area came alive with gunfire as several wendigos broke through the tree line. The red eyes, the rotten antlers, the emaciated frames. It was a scene of nightmares. They got closer to our position. We were able to drop 3 of them, but the 4th broke through our position. The Wendigo thrashed around, grabbing one of my teammates and tossing them up in the air and batting them away. They died on impact, the hit from the Wendigo breaking their spine. I leveled my rifle and fired, the rounds impacting the Wendigo's skull. The creature collapsed, and we immediately set fire to the bodies. The QRF came in immediately, with a cleanup crew collecting the remains of the victims, breaking down the camp and cleaning away the blood. I looked to the side, seeing my teammate, his name was Malcolm, being gingerly picked up from where he was thrown by the Wendigo. They placed him on a stretcher and covered his body, slowly carrying him off. The ride back to base was silent. We lost a good man that night, all because a bunch of idiots decided to meddle with a world they do not understand. But one thing concerned us and command. There were actual Wendigos in our area. Something was different. Their patterns were changing. A full investigation was being put underway, and the base was set on the highest alert level since I've been stationed there. Things are changing out here, and we need to find out what is going on before the situation escalates out of hand. That's all I can say for now. I'm heading out on a patrol now. I'll relay any updates when I get back. Take care, all of you. Nothing bullets cannot cure. So, let's cut to the chase. Command is on high alert now, more than ever. We have UAVs in the air at a constant cycle now, monitoring everywhere, close commo with the other bases, and beefed up patrols. Things are crazy and tense, but on another note, we got a new guy to replace Malcolm. For any of you who are questioning who Malcolm is, look over the previous post. The link is above. So, let me get some details about this guy out here. For privacy reasons, I'm going to stereotypically call him Rook since he's the new guy on the block. Rook was in the Rangers, did 4 tours in Afghanistan. Apparently, he was in country when I was in as well. Kind of a hard ass, so breaking him into how things work here is going to be a challenge to say the least, especially with how we treat certain populations. You see, when you're briefed into this job, you are told to be the wall to protect the innocent from the evil that goes bump in the night. When you get stationed here and meet these beings though, you realize you have to build a bond with them, and that some of them just want to live in peace and isolation. It took some time, but we've built a very healthy system here. It takes new guys some time to adjust, but after a few patrols they get the idea and keep up with how we operate. I hoped this would be the case with Rook. I really did. I ended up being the guy to meet him at the landing pad. The CH-47 landed, the ramp lowered, and bodies spilled out. Fresh recruits to replace our losses. I saw him, close-cut hair, that walk of purpose. I extended my hand. Welcome, I'm part of Hunter Team, your new outfit. He looked at me and gripped my hand with his, firmly shaking it. Glad to be here and be of service. What can you tell me about the area? He glanced all over, observing the air crews as they rushed to refuel the Chinook and whatever other aircraft decided to land. I looked at him and gestured to the bunker itself. Well, we got the werewolves and their lot in their shanty town up in the north, the deer people to the east, and the Sasquatch tribes to the west. I glanced at him as he nodded, taking the information in. Once we entered the base, I took him to our communal quarters, showing him bunk. Look, Rook, we got a system here with all of these groups, a system that works and benefits all of us. Just follow the orders of our CO, do your job, and we all make it home alive. And with our lens attached, got it? He nodded at me, dropping his duffel bag next to his bunk. I got it. When is the unit heading out? He sat down, looking up at me as two guys ran down the hallway putting on their gear. We got a patrol up north in a few hours. Have to reach out to the shanty town about a sighting reported the other day. Simple and to the point. Rook nodded at me, and we left it like that. Few hours later, we gear up and head out. Reaching the shanty town, we unloaded and calmly walked in, dressed down for the op. We usually roll out in full operator gear, but due to the relationship with the shanty town, we were just in our combat gear minus the combat shirt, so a regular t-shirt under our plate carriers. I nodded and waved at familiar faces, with Conrad making his way to where the alphas are. He greets them and sits down, starting conversation, leaving us to interact with the locals and monitor the area. Everyone was calm, save for Rook. He stood there, eyeing everyone. I knew his body language all too well, the same way you'd watch an area in Afghanistan, always waiting for something to pop off. The locals sensed his unease as well, keeping their distance from him. One thing led to another, and next thing we know there's commotion near one of the RVs, with Rook zip tying a man in front of his family. The kids are upset, and the wife shoves them inside and begins growling. The husband is pleading with the wife, but she doesn't listen. Rook is backing up, aiming at her with his rifle, telling her to stand down at a fever pitch. He's freaking out as he's watching her turn into her werewolf form. Things were about to go south, and no one stepped in. I sprint for it, getting between the two. I know the family very well. Their kids come and run around the MRAPs when we pass by. I call her by her name, pleading with her to calm down. She's fully transformed by now, and stomps toward me. I'm calm, but Rook is freaking out and shaking. She sniffs me and snarls, slowly reverting to her human form. Everyone is watching now, even the alphas. Conrad is with them, his eyes hidden under a pair of aviators, but I know he's mad. I untie the husband and apologize. He smiles and pats me on the shoulder, understanding, and rushing inside. I turn to Rook and grab him by the strap of his plate carrier, dragging him up against a nearby tree, landing a right hook across his face. Everyone is watching us in silence. Rook shoves me, asking me what my issue is. I explain to him that these people are no threat, that they respect our boundaries, that they just want to live in peace. He retorts that our job is to protect humanity. I grab him again, my gloved hands around his throat now. It takes a couple guys to tear me off him. The ride back to base is tense, with everyone silent. As we arrive, Conrad pulls Rook to the side, speaking to him, explaining to him that his stunt could have escalated the situation and caused the deaths of many individuals at the shanty town. We ended up being called into briefings soon after. Command found where the Wendigos have been migrating from. We are being mobilized with an armored and aviation task force to intercept and destroy them. I'll be out for a bit. This is a big operation. I'll try to relay as soon as I get back. Stay safe, everyone. Remember, nothing bullets cannot cure. Hey everyone, I'm back. It's been a good couple of days, and I can explain where I've been. We took the fight to them. It was a major operation, and we took them out. Command found out where the stream of Wendigos was coming from, and we brought the pain. We were given an armored and air task force to assist with dealing with the threat, as just sending ground troops would basically be free food for them. Let's get on to the meat of my report for you all. Command was contacted by one of our sister bases deep up north near the Canadian border. Apparently, their drones found the telltale signs of Wendigos encroaching in the area. Knowing that we were dealing with a small group pushing southward towards us, they asked if we were willing to participate in a joint SAR destruction operation on the Wendigo threat. Zweihander decided to send a large response force up north, which I was a part of. We would meet up with the other base's forces along with heavy armor and air cover and push into the Wendigo territory and annihilate them, while also keeping an eye out for civilians and RAO to evacuate or rescue. Command decided the operation should start at least in the day, as Wendigos have an extreme advantage at night. So, my unit packed up and we moved up north for the past few days. Our ground convoy was bigger, with us replacing our MRAPs for strikers and LAVs. This gave us added protection and firepower, as the strikers were equipped with their standard 30mm cannon, and the LAVs were equipped with 30mm cannons fitted with incendiary rounds and a flamethrower. Our air cover comprised of a flight of Apaches and Cobras. Their call signs were Black Raven and Roaring Dragon. On the ground it was my unit, Dragoon, Eagle, Reaver, Echo, Griffin, Hitman, Assassin, and Oddball. We linked up with 5 other teams, call sign Toolbox, Shotgun, Reaper, Talon, and Archangel. The initial push into the forest was uneventful, but the deeper we got is when we received contact. It was sporadic at first, as if they were testing us. Random debris would hit the armored hull of our vehicles, trees would fall, and our gunners would see movement in between the trees. We were all calm, save for Rook, who under his stoic demeanor that he was putting on, was pissing himself with fear. As much as he was on everyone's bad side for the stun he pulled, we still had his back and we hoped he had ours, so we could make it out alive. Our air cover engaged first, causing the convoy to halt. Apaches and Cobras danced and strafed the tree line, engaging targets at will and destroying their concealment. Plumes of powder white snow flew into the air as 30mm rounds from their chin guns impacted the earth. We heard their howls through the thick plating of the LAV as many rounds found their mark. Conrad kept his palm pressed against his headset, listening carefully for our cue to engage. I observed everyone. We were all in full combat gear, but our camouflage would clash against the white of the snow, which we didn't mind, allowed us to keep an eye on each other. That and multicam black worked extremely well on night operations. I gripped my HK-416 tightly, my thumb crossing the area where the safety selector was located. Conrad perked up and gave us a thumbs up, calling out, "Alright, Hunter team, time to engage. Let's move out." The cabin came alive with hollers as the ramp lowered and we quickly filed out and took up fighting positions. The quick blinding sensation of the sun shining on the white snow flashed into my eyes and was replaced with an almost serene vista. Then the sounds of gunfire, shouts, and helicopter blades brought me back to reality. I observed the chaos, moving forward with my unit, engaging where we saw fit. I saw them, their gaunt emaciated frames, striding through the snow effortlessly. Their howls chilled me to the core, but it was briefly, since I saw one fall from an incendiary 30mm round to the chest. I took aim and fired, the recoil kicking gently against my shoulder, my breathing slow and methodical. We kept pushing up under the cover of the air and the armor, pushing them deeper into the forest, closer to their lair. This went on for hours, till the moon shined over us. The howls increased as more of them came forth to assist their embattled comrades. I sprinted through the perimeter made by the armored task force. Vehicles lined up in rows, and between each vehicle was a dug-up position where a heavy weapons team was tasked to help hold the line. Tracers filled the night as rounds found their targets, and wendigos burst into flames. I found Conrad, who relayed to me that we were pushing deeper in. I nodded, sprinting to find the others. I found Rook first, helping a heavy weapons team set up, covering them as they planted their M249s into position. He looked at me, nodded, and moved to cover me as soon as the gunner team began suppressing the advancing wendigos. Once everyone was found, we regrouped with Conrad and Shotgun team. We moved behind a group of LAVs and strikers as they roared forward, their cannons and flamethrowers lashing out at the enemy in front of them. Flames danced forward and enveloped the arm of one of the wendigos, who in a fit of rage slammed into one of the strikers. The driver backed up quickly, firing away at the beast. More flames enveloped it as it tried to lash out at us behind an LAV. We fired, backing up as well, our rounds slamming into it as it thrashed around. The skin burned away, and the muscles melted off the bone as it finally collapsed into the snow in a pile of flame. Another one burst forward from the darkness, but was quickly gunned down. We kept moving, finally reaching the lair of the beasts. As we approached it, a larger wendigo sprang forth, holding a makeshift large branch as a club. Judging by its size, we assumed it was an ancient wendigo, one from centuries in the past. Every vehicle and operator opened fire, all of our rounds impacting it, but it still kept coming. It thrashed around, then tossed its makeshift weapon, it striking the side of one of the LAVs, and then slamming into a few of our allies, sending them sprawling. Rook and I slowly moved forward, heel to toe, firing and reloading as we went. We would move as one. When I would reload, he would cover me, and I would do the same for him. The beast slowly kept backing up, roaring into the night. Over on the radio, we heard the air cover coming in hot. Conrad ordered for us to pull back, and we did, leapfrogging back to the safety of the armored vehicles. The Apaches came in, strafing it with their 30mm, followed by the Cobras firing several tow missiles at it. Finally, 3 Apache Hellfires impacted the area, and the LAVs moved up, emptying their tanks for their flamethrowers onto the pile of rubble. We let out a ragged cheer, watching as the flames danced around and swallowed everything whole. This was a good day, a day we would all remember, a day where we took the fight to the darkness, and won. Lately, everything has been quiet, no sightings, no incidents. We are enjoying the current peaceful atmosphere. I'm heading out on patrol in a few hours, going to check up on the Sasquatch tribes. I hope you all stay safe out there, and remember, nothing bullets cannot cure. Hey everyone, it's been a while. This past week has been intense. We found out that rogue cryptid groups aren't the only thing we had to worry about, and it almost cost us dearly. Let me start from the top. When we went to check with the Sasquatch tribes, we arrived at the area and stepped out. The Sasquatch people are extremely peaceful and helpful. They've directed us to lost hikers, or have even brought us people they saved from certain death in the wild. We communicate with sign language, just as you would with a gorilla. They are an awe to behold in person, I can tell you that much. I exited the MRAP, the crunch of dirt under my boots as I observed the area. We left our weapons in the vehicle, as we usually do when we visit, as the sight of weapons make them uncomfortable. The area was laid out like a small village, simple yet sturdy huts, and the Sasquatch going about their daily routines. We heard a few grunts and hollers towards us. We waved back in kind and walked toward where their leader was. We reached the center of the small village, and the largest one stepped out, standing at a solid 9 feet. He was a sight to see. Conrad smiled and began signing. "How are you all doing?" he asked, looking around at the village. "Harvest and hunt seem to be very bountiful this season." The leader grunted, signing back, his chest puffed with pride. "Season has been very good. Many strong young ones helped. No one bother us. We stay safe and hidden." He then looked at all of us, beckoning us to follow him. We trailed behind him, sensing the urgency. We arrived at a large hut and stepped inside. What we found was shocking to say the least. A whole family, husband, wife, their toddler and infant. The leader looked at us and began signing again. We find them running from other humans. Other humans dressed funny, their heads covered, but we sensed they were bad. We waited until night. Bad humans had guns, so we took good humans away from them. Conrad nodded, replying, "Thank you so much for doing that. We will take them now. Please stay hidden and safe. We will be looking around the area for these other humans." The leader nodded and huffed, leaving us to collect the family. From what we gathered on our way back to base was that the family was on the run from an extremist doomsday cult hidden past our patrol areas. We also learned they are dabbling in the occult, and their leader is pushing to open a dimensional rift and unleash beings from the other side and summon the apocalypse. I would be lying if I said we thought of this as another day on the job. I've dealt with werewolves, wendigos, even the occasional skinwalker, but the occult was a different beast. We heard of teams in Europe dealing with the occult, vampires, ghouls, fairies, necromancers, and even dragons. Swayhander knew this and called in a favor from across the ocean. Over the next few days, we had an influx of new personnel from the European bases. I was able to talk to some of the guys, and what I learned had me on the fence. The Europeans were waging a shadow war on every cryptid within their borders, both docile and hostile. While we have a decent relationship with some of the cryptid groups, and even made a bond with them, the Europeans have been implementing a scorched earth policy. Nothing lies. I have my reservations, but I do understand that their cryptid population is a completely different system. I just hope they wouldn't try to alter the structure and system we've worked so hard to maintain here. We were all called to briefing, and given our objectives, the cult was holed up in the mountains, stockpiling weapons and supplies for their apocalypse. Our objective was to hit hard and leave nothing standing. We were given new ammunition variants, courtesy of the European teams. The rounds themselves were all blessed by priests, mixed with melted religious artifacts, and imbued with holy ash. We were assured these would deal with the cultists, and whatever creatures they were able to summon. We mobilized and moved out. Several armored columns followed by air cover and transport. Command was not taking any chances. We also had use of a nearby army base, and their artillery pieces if push came to shove. We came under fire as soon as we neared the mountain. Mostly small arms from what we could tell. The turrets on our transports opened fire and launched smoke canisters to cover our dismount. We piled out and moved forward, using scattered trees and our vehicles for cover. The air was ripe with the crackle of gunfire and shouts. Overhead, 2 Apaches roared overhead, their 30mm cannons strafing the enemy defense positions. I dropped near a fighting position, cupping my headset, listening closely to the net. Eagle team, taking fire 11 o'clock. Contact right side. Set up that 240 now. Dragoon team, I need suppressing fire on our left flank now. Set up that MG there. Swayhander, all units be advised European task force has reported cultists are fielding cryptid standby. Reaper team, 3 o'clock. Check your fire. 2-2, I need a saw to cover that sector, or we'll get overrun. Echo team, be advised our Mark 19 is down. Our Mark 19 is down. We got a man down requesting case vac. I was shaken out of my trance by Conrad, who motioned for me to move up. I leveled my rifle and followed him up the hill. What I saw had me questioning who we were fighting. I saw the cultists, some dressed in plain clothes, others in ceremonial garbs, and what appeared to be cryptids we never encountered before. These things stood around 7 feet, long arms, gaunt frames, horns jutting out of their forehead, black curled talons on their hands and feet, dense where their eyes should be, and a long snout, filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. We engaged them, our rounds impacting the beasts. The ammo given to us was effective, but not as fast as we hoped. It took several shots to take these things down, and they bounded down the hill to our positions fast. The European teams moved up ahead of us, with tall rectangular shields, like those of the Roman legions, only that these shields were covered in what appeared to be explosives. They formed a shield wall between us and the beasts, and a large flash of light emanated from the shields themselves, causing the beasts to fall back, covered in burns and gaping holes in their bodies. They slowly moved up, inch by inch as we fell in behind them. The cultists fell back into their hideout, and we pursued, clearing each room methodically. We finally reached the last chamber, which was larger than the others. We found several Sasquatches chained in a row, beaten and bleeding, and the last of the cultists facing us along with their leader. The man strode up to us, his arms extended from underneath his robes, his mouth spread ear to ear in a fanatical grin. Welcome, all of you. You are about to witness the cleansing of this world, the rebirth of our very civilizations. He paced by the chained Sasquatches, taking a blade and slitting the throat of one of them, which caused the rest to wail in despair. With the blood of these beasts, we open a portal to our lords, who will help us rid the world of impurities. He glared at us and of you all. With a flash of red light, a portal opened and several of the unidentified cryptids stepped out, one of them impaling the leader, who laughed in crazed glee onto its claws. The beasts charged us, and we engaged, the European teams forming their shield wall once more. In a flash of light, several of the cryptids flew back, save for 2 who slammed through the shields. We emptied our magazines into them as they barreled through us, and I felt weightless as one of them grabbed me by the strap of my plate carrier. I pulled out my side arm and frantically shot at what I assumed was its face. The hollow point rounds impacted its skin, tearing chunks of flesh off it. It howled and tossed me across the room, sending me tumbling in a cloud of dust. I felt a sharp pain in my side as I impacted the cave wall, and everything went to black. When I woke up, I was outside behind my team, next to the Sasquatches we found. It was hazy at first, but I slowly got up, feeling a sharp pain in my left arm. I used my rifle as a crutch and got up, leveling it. Everyone was shouting, with my team and others from the North American base aiming at the Europeans. Rook looked at me, his eyes wide. Bro, you're up. Man, it's a mess. The Euros want to wipe out the Sasquatches we found, but Conrad found out they were taken from one of the tribes and forced into this. The Euros don't buy it and want them dead. Damn man, the stage just keeps getting better, doesn't it? I gave him a dry laugh. I know, right? God, my arm hurts. He chuckled a bit. Gotta stop choking the snakes, man, it's bad for ya. I rolled my eyes at him. He chuckled and flipped me a quick bird, then returned to our current situation, staring down the barrels of people we were just fighting alongside. Minutes felt like hours, as neither of us budged. I looked back at the Sasquatches. They were huddled together, scared. I gave them a gentle nod, hoping that I could assure they would be safe. Suddenly, one of the European guys held up a hand, then cupped his headset. His body language seemed perplexed, maybe even irritated. He slowly lowered his rifle, motioning for the others to do the same. We lowered ours as well, gesturing for the cryptids to follow us. We loaded them onto an air transport and had them flown to our base. Once we arrived, the Europeans quickly left, leaving us some of their gear for us to use. From what I can tell, we won't be seeing much of them anytime soon. Anyway guys, I have to go. Getting called to the briefing room. I'll get back to you all soon. Stay safe, and remember, nothing bullets cannot cure. There's been a breach. We've been hit. I don't know how the hell this happened, but they hit us hard. The Council of Alphas are nearly dead, and it's all falling apart around us. The perimeter guns are going loud as I tell you all this. Whatever werewolves that are loyal to our treaty are helping us hold the line. We've requested backup from nearby air bases and are hoping it comes soon. Let me give you all the rundown of what happened. We were doing our regular patrols. The entire area was as it should be. Ever since we got rid of that cult, the usual peace followed. Conrad got a message from the Elder Pack leader, relaying to us that several packs of younger werewolves broke off just as the previous one did a while back. He said they were planning something big, and that he would relay to us as soon as he figured out what was going on. We relayed the information to Zweihander, who raised the base alert level up to 4, to account for the number of werewolves on the loose. I sat in the common area, browsing and relaying information to other bases about sightings and anomalies. Then Conrad ran through the door, startling all of us. We looked at him as he stared at us, his jaw set. Gear up. We're heading out. Augustus is compromised, he said, turning and heading out. Augustus was the code word for the head alpha of the werewolves, and if he was compromised, that meant the entire power structure of the area would fall into disarray. We geared up, jumped into our MRAP, and sped off to the shanty town. While we were en route, Conrad played the recording of what he received. Augustus, hey man, I know you told me you were also looking into this mess, so I decided to relay some information I gathered. I found out who's the leader of this insurrection. And wait, what are you doing here? Several gunshots ring out. An audible thud is heard. Augustus, do not do this. Years of trusts, years of kinship will be wiped away. You will bring destruction to our people. Please, I beg of you, think of the generations after us. Unknown male, trust, kinship. We owe nothing to these humans. They are beneath us, yet they strut around as if they are one of us, or even worse, above us. We will wipe them from the pages of history. Old man, we are in new worlds now. Single gunshot is heard. Transmission cuts off. We all sat there in stunned silence, contemplating what we just heard. I leaned back in my chair, my thumb caressing the fire selection switch on my rifle. I turned my head to the front of the vehicle as I heard our driver call out, "Contact 12 o'clock. Looks like several housing areas are burning." Conrad nodded, then opened the hatch as the vehicle stopped. It was raining as we poured out of the vehicle, the smoke hanging in the air like a fog. We set up a perimeter, scanning our sectors, slowly moving out. Rook squeezed my shoulder as he moved past me, whispering, "On your 6, bud." We barely made it away from our MRAP when the first shots rang out. 2 of our guys went down. Conrad started yelling to engage. Howls filled the air as we started to push back to our vehicle and collect our wounded. Several large dark figures darted in and out of the haze, Screams reached a crescendo as our unit was torn into on multiple sides. Our driver stepped out, firing off his shotgun, hitting one of our assailants. My eyes widened as I saw a clawed hand grab him by his helmet. His arms and legs flailed around as he struggled, the beast taking a chunk out of his throat and tossing his lifeless body into the mud. I opened fire at the beast, the round stitching its body upward, 2 rounds slamming into its jaw and temple. It slumped over and fell off the MRAP. I turned to face outward, firing several bursts at whatever I could see. I heard Conrad yell to regroup near the vehicle. An MRAP holds 8 people, driver, passenger, and 6 in the back. We went in with 8, and from what I can tell there were only 4 of us left. We all aimed outward at the darkness, the growls accompanying the soft patter of rainfall around us. The growls turned into snarls, followed by full-on roars then whimpers as we heard the splash of feet distance themselves from us. We stood there, our bodies pressed together as we each covered a different sector. Then we heard a voice call out to us, "It's okay, you're safe." We looked at each other, I scoffed, Rook muttering, "If we're safe I expect to see some fine girls walking up to us." I let out a dry chuckle, "I just want a beer at this point, man." This roused a few more laughs, with someone else chiming in, "I hear that." We all accepted that if we were going to die, we were going to die together, and take as many as them with us. We heard wet footsteps approaching us. We leveled our rifles toward the sound, and a woman came toward us, her hands up. Her red hair was drenched, as was her jacket. She looked at the scene around us, swearing under her breath. Several werewolves came behind her, carrying some of our men. They gingerly placed them near us. Rook checked them all. He made note that they were alive, but barely. We loaded them onto the vehicle, along with our dead. I turned to face the woman, and the werewolves with her. She looked at us, flipping her collar up. "Not all of us accept this violence. We will join you. It might not be now, but soon we shall join you in this war." She looked around. "I am so sorry this happened to you." With that she sprinted off into the dark, her compatriots in tow. I hopped into the driver's seat and slammed my foot down on the gas. The vehicle bounded down the road, the rain slamming against the metal body. In front of us was the base. The searchlights were on and the gate itself was shut. It opened slowly and a large group of personnel spilled out, weapons drawn as they waved us in. Howls permeated the air as we got out and the gate slammed shut. They were coming and we did not have long to prepare. Gunners manned towers, along with snipers, and defensive positions were set up around the entrance into our base itself. Our base is built into a mountain, akin to safety bunkers used for nuclear fallout. We had 4 layers of defense, all leading up to the massive doors that separated the outside from the intricate layers of our base of operations. Even then, inside had several checkpoints of machine gun teams setting up in case the outer defenses fell. I quickly made my way to the armory, replenishing my ammo and explosives. Rook followed close behind, alongside Conrad and the other survivors of our team. We all nodded at each other and made our way to the outer perimeter. That's when the gunfire began to start up. They were here. We sprinted through the halls and made it outside. The guard towers were alive with gunfire as they engaged the oncoming threats. Several werewolves made it over the wall, and we engaged them, their large but nimble frames bounding toward our defensive line. More bodies continued to climb over as the towers tried to stem the tide. We kept firing at the mass of flesh approaching us. Many fell, but others began approaching our positions. They impacted our positions in massive claws and teeth. We fought back with bullets, knives, and swords. Several of our troops procured melee weapons throughout their time here. Many chose long swords to deal with the wolves, the blades being coated in silver and holy ash. In the ensuing melee, I saw one of our guys slam his sword through the chest of one of them. He was subsequently tackled and torn apart. I can still remember his screams and swears as he pulled the pin on one of his grenades, the explosion taking majority of them with him. We slowly began to drive them back. This allowed us to count our losses and wounded. A lot of good men and women were lost in a span of 60 minutes. As we regrouped, we heard commotion at the gate. Conrad nudged his head in that direction, and we all made our way to the perimeter. We saw a mass of people huddled by the gate, men, women, and children. In front of them was the same woman that helped us when we were ambushed. She looked at us, her eyes showing sympathy for what was happening. She bowed her head. Please, we have nowhere to go. We are not welcome no longer since we will not participate in this purge. I beg of you, I plead, that you can find it in your hearts to help us. We looked at each other, then at her, standing in awkward silence for a few moments until someone shoved through us muttering, "God damn it, man, these kids are freezing. Get them in." We snapped out of our trance and rushed them inside the base, inside guards, and medical personnel tended to them alongside our wounded. I looked at the scene, then slowly turned to the line of body bags on the other end of the medical ward. I hung my head and slowly walked past them towards the unit quarters. I changed out of my soaked uniform, trading it in for a warm set, sitting down and staring at myself in the mirror. Tonight was going to be a long night. My mind was still trying to process what just happened, and on the radio, I heard that reinforcements were being mustered to our area. I don't know how long we can hold out, but we've been told they are massing for another assault. The strongest werewolves of the refugee group have volunteered to help us, and unmanned combat drones have been deployed to assist with defenses. I know I'm not going to be able to sleep for a while. Take care, everyone. I hope you all have full and happy lives. For context, I'm an 83-year-old man and I used to work as a missionary in my youth. I've been involved in the Christian church since birth, and God has always been a part of my life. However, my faith is the only thing I can thank my parents for. As a child, my father was neglectful at best and abusive at worst. My mother did her best to care for me, but she had other children who needed her attention too. She couldn't afford to spend much time with me. Her work kept her busy, and she made sure that we would eat. But there were times when she didn't come home from the fields for days at a time. So when my church began their missionary initiative, I didn't have much to lose, and wanted to give back to the God who had been there for me throughout my hardships. I joined the missionaries immediately after my 18th birthday, and we were shipped off to a previously uncontacted island near Papua New Guinea. We arrived at the edge of what was once jungle, but now only contained small patches of trees interspersed with large swaths of cleared land. The natives lived in huts made of wooden leaves, and our mission was to convert them to Christianity by whatever means necessary. The first few weeks went smoothly. We taught them about God, the Bible, and basic Christian values. They listened to us respectfully, though they never took part in the lesson. At night, we slept in tents around fires that burned constantly. But then, one evening, we discovered something strange while we were resting. One of the missionaries spotted it while we were walking around the perimeter of our camp. A small patch of skin peeking out from inside of a tree. He brought his flashlight closer and saw a pulsating mass of flesh that crawled beneath the surface of the tree. He fell back in horror, surprised, and ran back to the tent where he woke the rest of the missionary staff, including me. We all gathered around the tree to investigate. It was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. We pulled more bark off the tree to reveal the same fleshy mass. Eventually, we had stripped the tree completely and found nothing but skin and muscle. By that point, we were all thoroughly horrified at this discovery, and agreed not to go further for the time being. After we returned to camp, we decided to keep the news to ourselves, as there was clearly something wrong about this island. The last thing we wanted was to let the native tribe know that we knew. Instead, we told them we simply went to explore the island and became lost. The next day, the chief of the island came to speak with me. His English was poor, but he was a fast learner and I was able to understand him to some degree. He asked me why we had gone so far into the jungle, that there were dangerous things out there, and it was for the best that we remained in the camp limits. I could see the knowing glint in his eye. He knew we had seen something we weren't supposed to, and he was not happy. So, I gave him my word that we'd stick within the appropriate area. That seemed to calm him, but there was still an air of unease and tension between us. Weeks passed without incident, until one morning a group of tribal members approached me. They wanted to get to know me better. They asked if I was married and what my family looked like. At first, I felt uncomfortable answering their questions, but after some coaxing, they convinced me it was okay. My heart raced as they began asking about my childhood and the relationship with my parents. They asked if I had brothers or sisters and how many, and if I had any kids yet. When I answered no, they smiled and said maybe soon. It was strange seeing them so friendly. It wasn't like they had been violent before, but I was certainly cautious. Yet now, they stood before me like old friends. It made me uneasy and I told them I had to go. The sinister smiles didn't leave their faces as they watched me walk away back to my camp. It got worse from there. One night, I awoke to hear voices from outside my tent. I thought nothing of it and continued to sleep. But then, I heard a loud scream. I jumped up and grabbed my weapon. But when I peeked outside the tent, I saw no one. The moon was bright and I could see the entire camp, and it was empty. Not stopping to wake up the other missionaries, I let my curiosity lead me further into the empty village. I crept through the huts and found nothing out of place except the cutting silence. Defeated and confused, I turned back to my camp, as I noticed a light on the inactive volcano. It appeared to be a group making their way to the top. Ignoring the warning inside me to turn and run, I resolved to discover once and for all the truth about the island. What I had thought was a long walk to the base passed within minutes, as my head throbbed with the desire to know. Was it my head throbbing? Or was it the ground beneath me, pulsating and squirming underneath the dirt surface? As I neared the summit, I began to see more and more of those fleshy lumps poking from the ground. The trees, the plants, everything. I couldn't help but feel as if the earth itself was alive. I reached the top. I was greeted with the sight of the village standing together as if in prayer. A stone altar sat next to the edge, carved with strange symbols. In the haze, I could barely make out the figure kneeling at the altar, but it was obvious he was praying. What horrified me far more than this, however, was what surrounded me. It was flesh. The entire crater was made of the sticky pink tissue that writhed and wriggled beneath the praying figures. The deep hole inside the lump of flesh was full of flailing pink tentacles covered in tooth-like spikes. I ducked down to avoid being spotted, but it was too late. The villagers noticed me and shouted angrily. Several of them apprehended me, and I struggled to break free to no avail. They dragged me to the altar where the leader was waiting with a knife. "You can see it now, can't you?" he croaked. "The truth of this island, you've seen it." His eyes widened as he saw the horrified look on my face, and he grinned. "It's alive," I said fearfully. His smile morphed into a scowl. "Alive? No. It is so much more. It blessed us with this home, but it demands sacrifice if we wish to continue thriving here." He raised the blade and prepared to slit my throat. However, the tension was suddenly broken by a loud gunshot. The leader fell to the ground holding his fresh wound. Nobody move. One of my partners stood several meters away from the tribe. I rushed forward towards him, running across the sticky flesh. Two of the natives jumped on my partner, pinning him to the ground and clutching at his arms. "What do you think you're doing?" he yelled. "Are you trying to get yourself killed? Run!" I know you might think I'm evil for leaving him like I did, but I was only a kid, and I was completely in shock. I raced past him as he struggled against the tribesmen. Forest and flesh groaned and writhed as I bolted through it. I didn't stop until I felt the cool ocean air on my face. The sound of the waves crashing onto the beach brought me back to reality. It was over. I collapsed onto the sand, my body shaking in terror and tears streaming down my cheeks. The other missionaries and I radioed an SOS, and by God's grace, a nearby tanker was able to pick us up. I've never told anyone this story, but now that death is coming to claim me, I felt I had to share it. I believe it could be what keeps me from going to hell. I also wanted to warn everyone about the horrible things happening on the island. I hope this reaches the right person, and that you take this seriously. I live in a haunted house. I've lived here for about 5 months now. Over that time, I've experienced a number of inexplicable occurrences I'd like to detail here, concluding with my most recent incident, which is by far the creepiest and most disturbing. When I bought this house, I wasn't aware of the state of things. I was told by the realtor that the house was vintage and rustic, but what really stood out to me was when he said, "Trust me, you'll really like this house. I can tell because it's calling your name." I now know he was just trying to quickly sell me the house to get it off his hands. I'm the type of guy who enjoys nature, so an isolated rustic farmhouse would suit me perfectly. Based on this and the fact that it was relatively cheap, I jumped at the offer. In retrospect, maybe a little too quickly. About a month after my move, I began noticing that something was off. I hear frequent bumps in the night and strange thuds, along with other strange, unexplainable noises throughout the house. At the time, I tried to attribute these sounds to the age of the house, but they happened so frequently and were so unnatural that I soon began to suspect something else was to blame. Furthermore, every now and then items of mine would go missing and turn up in places they shouldn't be. For example, I once misplaced several pairs of socks, only to find them stuck to the ceiling in different rooms. No matter what happened though, I would still try to come up with a reasonable explanation. But the following occurrence has no reasonable explanation. It was late one night, and I was getting ready to go to sleep when I heard something coming from downstairs. I walked out into the hallway and stood there listening for a moment to try and understand what I was hearing. After a few seconds, I realized I must have left the television on in the living room. I was pretty tired, so it wasn't impossible that I simply forgot to turn it off before coming upstairs. I walked down the stairs and stopped when I reached the bottom. The lights in the kitchen were still on. I found this rather odd due to the fact that I clearly remembered turning them off before going upstairs. However, I shook this off because I figured if I was tired enough to forget to turn the television off, then I probably forgot to turn the lights off as well. I turned around to face the living room, which is just off from the kitchen, and jumped at what I saw, the dark shape of a man seated on my couch. I called out to him, "Hello," but got no response. I walked over to the couch and became even more bewildered by what I saw. I didn't realize it at first, but due to the fact the lights were on, the man should have been fully visible but was not. I could only see his silhouette. I suddenly realized why it looked so strange. It was as if someone had taken the shape of a man and made it into a cardboard cutout. The silhouette was two-dimensional. As I stared at it, I felt something was odd, and there was something popping in and out of its chest. It was a heart. My eyes were fixated on it as it continued to throb vigorously. I could swear that I felt the heart pulsating in my head like an uncontrollable pounding. I picked up the television remote, which was sitting on the arm of the couch, and hit the power button. The television screen went black, and just as quickly as the display dimmed, the silhouette was no longer there. I almost didn't believe what I had just seen. There was no scientific or logical explanation for this encounter whatsoever. The next occurrence is distressing and extremely off-putting, and made me start to wonder if this was personal. After a long day of work, I had come home and decided I'd take a shower to calm down and relax. Upon getting out of the shower, I heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. The walls in the house were very thin, so any sound made anywhere in the house could be heard very clearly, regardless of which room you were in. I exited the bathroom, wrapped in nothing but my towel, and stood in the hallway for a minute listening to see if I'd hear the sound once more. I didn't, so I cautiously went down the stairs, calling out, "Hello, is anyone there?" Of course I got no response, but what I saw when I reached the base of the staircase confuses me to this day. There, on my countertop, was all of my silverware. They weren't simply sprawled around or anything like that, they were all standing upright. Now, my silverware had curved hilts and handles, so it's absolutely impossible to stand them up on their own like that. The only way it would be possible to do so was if someone were to stand there holding them that way. I just stood there, dumbfounded by what I was seeing. Suddenly, the silverware dropped, and I flinched as a loud clang sounded throughout the house as forks and knives clattered onto the floor. I walked over to where they'd fallen and noticed they were aligned on the floor in such a way that they all pointed towards me, as if I was a magnet that had drawn their tines and blades my way. Utterly confused and startled, I ran upstairs to get dressed before cleaning the mess, but upon returning downstairs, observed that the silverware was no longer there. I opened the silverware drawer to find every piece back where it belonged. To this day, I have no explanation for this disconcerting event. The next occurrence is something even stranger and more unsettling. As usual, I'd hear the occasional strange noise and such, but that was it. No silverware standing by itself on my countertop, or two-dimensional silhouettes watching television. A few months had passed since my last two incidents, and I felt that things had gotten better, but I was wrong. It was late one night, and I had been sleeping soundly when I suddenly awoke with a chill. I didn't know why I was so cold, because I had turned up the heat and bundled up with 3 blankets before going to sleep that night. I sat up in my bed and just listened for a moment, expecting to hear something but did not. I glanced down at my bedding and noticed one of my blankets was missing, my thick quilt, the blanket that had been the main source of my warmth. That night, I leaned over and checked both sides of my bed to see if it had fallen onto the floor while I was sleeping, but it hadn't. I pulled off the rest of my blankets, now shivering from the near freezing temperature in my room, put on my bathrobe, grabbed the flashlight off my nightstand, and walked over to the thermostat. I shined the flashlight on it and noticed the little red indicator was on the 50-degree peg and the AC was running. Now, I was even more confused. I had turned on the heat and set it to 70 degrees before going to sleep that night. There was no way it could have changed on its own. Anxiety crept over me as the thought that perhaps someone else could be in the house shot through my mind. I exited my room and slowly shined my flashlight down the hallway to check for signs that someone else was in the house. I saw nothing, so I proceeded down the stairs and paused when the kitchen came into view. My heart nearly stopped. You know how people put a sheet over their head to pretend to be a ghost? That's what I was seeing. Just beyond the countertop, standing at the sink, was something wearing my quilt. Due to the sheer size and length of the quilt, it fully covered whatever was under it. My flashlight only provided me with so much light, but I could roughly make out the physique of the figure, and what disturbed me most was its face, or lack thereof. I could make out where its head and shoulders were, and naturally I would have been able to make out where its nose and face were, but it appeared that this figure didn't have one. Where the protrusion of its nose should have been, it was flat, as if its face was just a blank canvas. Against my better judgment, I called out to the figure, "What are you doing here? Please leave." At this, the figure turned towards me. Startled by its sudden movement, I jumped a bit, nearly dropping the flashlight. Slowly, the figure began walking towards the stairs. "Please, just put the quilt down and leave. There's no need for a confrontation." My voice wavered as I spoke, my words falling on deaf ears as the figure continued. I instinctively began backing up the stairs out of fear that this thing would dart up and try to overtake me. I suddenly realized I hadn't blinked for the duration of the encounter, and my eyes were beginning to sting. I blinked quickly, and in the split second my eyes were closed. The thing had moved and was now 4 steps away from me. Startled by this, I jumped back and thudded against the wall behind me. The flashlight fell from my hand and landed on the stair below me. Out of pure panic, I ran back up the stairs, into my room, and locked the door. I just stood there in the darkness, listening for the footsteps of the figure. After several minutes of silence had passed, I slowly felt my way through to the darkness, back to my bed. Knowing there was no way I was getting back to sleep after all that, I sat on my bed shivering until sunrise. Once light illuminated my house, and I was more tired than afraid, I unlocked my bedroom door and opened it. There, on the floor right in front of the door, was my quilt, neatly folded. Sometimes I think I was just really tired, and dreamt the whole thing because nothing like that has ever happened to me before. And after this incident, nothing like it ever happened again, but there simply isn't an explanation for how my quilt could have ended up outside my room, neatly folded all on its own. The following occurrence is the final, most recent one, having happened just 2 days ago. I'm still conflicted about what exactly I should do about it. For context, every so often, I'd have vivid dreams that are extremely strange and symbolic. Sometimes they'd be of a room with one door. I'm standing outside of the room, looking at the door, and all of a sudden the door will begin to violently shake as something trapped inside begins pounding furiously on it. The desire to escape is palpable. Other times my dreams would consist of a lone cage seated in a white room. Inside the cage is an indistinguishable black silhouette. Similar to my previous dream, the silhouette has a palpable desire to escape. Usually, after the dream, I'd wake up and sit bolt upright in my bed, beads of sweat dripping down my forehead. Other times, I'd swear I could feel the pounding door beneath me as I slept. Sometimes, before I even fell asleep, I'd feel something pounding underneath my bed. The bed would shake violently as if something was trying to escape from underneath it. The pounding didn't happen every night, only nights I'd have one of the 2 aforementioned dreams. It just so happens that I had been having those dreams almost every night for a week before this most recent incident. And the pounding associated with the dreams got progressively worse each night. On the night of the incident, the pounding had been so violent that I was thrown out of my bed. I decided enough was enough. I was going to move my bed to try and find the cause of the pounding and put a stop to it once and for all. I stood up, turned on my bedroom light, and walked over to the foot of my bed. I stood there for a moment just staring at the mattress, waiting for the pounding to resume, but it did not. I grabbed the footboard and moved the bed aside. I walked over to where my bed had been and stood within the indentation it made on the carpeted floor. I knelt down and knocked forcibly on the floor. To my surprise, I heard a hollow thud as if I had just hit a wooden panel. I immediately ran downstairs and grabbed a box cutter to remove the carpeting. Upon removing the carpet, I discovered there indeed was a wooden panel. I could tell it was really old because the wood had that sickening gray color it gets when it begins to rot. I forced the box cutter's blade into one of the crevices in the wood and used it as a lever to lift the panel. When I peered into the hole, the most intense, gut-wrenching smell filled my nostrils. I almost vomited right there. The smell of old pipes mixed with rotting something did not make for a pleasant aroma. Holding back my vomit, I took a good long look down at the gaping hole in my bedroom floor. There was a set of old wooden stairs, seemingly leading into a hidden room under my bed. I was confused because my bedroom was right above the kitchen, and in order for this space to be here, there'd have to be some structure jutting out of the kitchen ceiling. But there was not. Despite this logical flaw and the uninviting scent, I carefully made my way down the rickety stairs. The room was really small. I'm talking not even half the size of my bedroom, which wasn't very big at all. The ceiling was really low, and I had to crouch in order to fit. Along the right wall was a long desk that ran the length of the wall. I could see rusty piping underneath it. Above the desk were several metal cabinets, each padlocked. All along the opposite wall were several large bins. Each bin had a faded label on it, except for the bin closest to the farthest wall. That bin was open, and the label appeared relatively new. From where I was standing, I was able to make out what was written on it, the date I moved in. An intense feeling of anxiety crept over me. Why was that date written on that bin? These bins had to have been down here for a very long time, and there was no way that the previous owners could have known the date I'd be moving in. While this information did creep me out, I wanted to know what was in one of these bins. My curiosity got the better of me, and I walked over to the nearest bin and lifted the lid. I wish now that I hadn't done that. Inside were the skeletal remains of a young child. I dropped the lid and fell backwards, disgust and anguish overwhelming me. Why was this under my bed? And who put these bins here? These thoughts ran through my mind as I tried but failed to make sense of what I had just discovered. I hadn't noticed before due to my shock, but my lungs were burning and my eyes were watering from whatever fumes I was inhaling while down in that room. I had to leave. I ran up the stairs, through the wood panel back over the hole, and ran out of my bedroom, down the stairs, and out the front door. Once I regained my composure, I went back inside and sat down on my couch in the living room. It then occurred to me that I had only glanced into one of the several bins. I could only imagine what other atrocities could be hidden within the others. All at once I thought back to the banging underneath my bed. Could something be alive down there? Could it now escape since my bed was no longer trapping it? Now, scared that something could escape, I ran back upstairs and into my bedroom, my eyes immediately darting to floor. The wood panel was still in place over the hole. I walked over and grabbed the loose section of carpet, picking it up and throwing it to the side. I then pushed my bed back to its original position over the wooden panel, hopefully keeping whatever malevolent forces beneath it at bay. Suddenly, the pounding began. The mattress shook violently, bouncing up and down on the metal bed frame. For a second, I thought about throwing myself on top of it to keep it in place, but did not. I felt as though I was going insane. The pounding seemed to infiltrate my mind. I covered my ears with my hands and ran out of the room, back downstairs, and into the living room. I sat down on my couch and curled up into a ball, hands still over my ears, praying that the pounding would stop. I just sat there on the couch for the rest of the day, listening as the pounding continued to assault me. I've since moved out of that room and now sleep on the couch in my living room. Every night I hear the pounding, getting louder and more forceful. It's only a matter of time before whatever's down there breaks free. I have no idea what to do. I'm thinking about moving heavier objects on top of the panel, but I'm too scared to move the bed in order to do so. There's something very powerful and very evil in that small room, and I don't know if I want to stick around much longer to find out what it is. I think I might have to give my realtor a call. First thing you should know about me, I'm a scam artist. My business provides a service, but it also sells a lie. My name is Goodwin. I'm a ghost hunter. It's a general partnership, the business, and its own three ways between me and my two associates, operating out of a seedy head office worth half the amount we rent it for each year. We're known collectively as the Spook Stalkers. Someone sees their dead mother wandering around the cellar, we're there. A couple describes a mystery man stalking the hallway of their condo. He's wearing a frock coat and wide-brimmed top hat, and they're sure he's from a different plane of existence. We're there. Reports of an army master sergeant roaming the grounds of a World War II graveyard, dancing around headstones, lollygagging. Also, he's been dead for 50 years. We're there. We're always there, to perpetuate the lie. Yes, the sounds you hear at night are of supernatural origin, and the fact that your house was built over a medieval burial ground definitely has something to do with that. We explain. A guy says to me, the previous owner said this place is haunted, and now I'm seeing things. So I tell him, the previous owner was correct. This case is a perfect demonstration of the psychological process of suggestion. Another guy says to me, I hear noises at night, whistling and the like. So I tell him, definitely a specter. His air conditioning filter is clogged, but it continues to draw in the airflow where it can. Hence the whistling. Even another guy says to me, I saw something at night. So I tell him, it's a ghost. It's actually toxic mold. Case after case, I bite my tongue and say, the things you're seeing are real. Because if they aren't, I have nothing to sell them. That's my crime, telling others the dead walk among the living, selling so much fiction that I might as well be a novelist. But these kinds of crimes don't go unpunished. And never has that been more clear to me than now. I make a living telling lies. Now is my turn to tell the truth. It began with Greta Keaton, mid-70s, widow, bridge player. She reached out to us via our website, explaining how her dead husband wasn't really dead. I see him here, I see him there, and I know it's him. It must be. Her message said, nothing remarkable, just more of the same. Dead spouse, dead parent, dead army sergeant. Everything blurred together in time. We wrote back to accept the assignment before negotiating price. A deal was reached, and not 3 days after we made contact, I was outside her craftsman home and shaking her hand. She was short and stout but kind and resilient. Her dyed red hair stood out amongst the house's gray exterior, and from behind her cat-eyed glasses, she looked at me as if I were a grandchild. Nice to meet you, Mr. Goodwin. The very same, I responded. Moments later, she ushered me inside, and our conversation quickly devolved into the topic of her dead husband. Oh yeah, footsteps. Lots and lots of footsteps, she said as we explored her house's ground floor, mostly at night, and during the day. I asked, oh yeah, lots and lots of footsteps, she declared. A few more steps over the Berber carpet brought us to the vinyl flooring of the kitchen. I'll see him in here sometimes, she told me. Or at least I think I do. Mostly it's just a feeling. Harold's presence never seems to wear off. The basement wasn't much to look at. It was unfinished with bare concrete flooring, exposed support columns, and asbestos on the piping. At the right angle, it did look haunted. For its age, the house, in its entirety, was fairly exceptional. My Harold was quite the handyman. Greta said while we toured the upstairs. The renovations, which must have cost more than the house itself, kept it modern and durable. But even so, I always checked for weak points, something that could account for Harold's alleged resurrection. Only an investigation would reveal what she was really experiencing, whether it was the effects of infrastructure sound, or carbon monoxide poisoning, to name a few. Had I discovered anything of that nature, I would have told her to move. If not, I'd allow her to stay put. Stay with Harold, I would have said. She'd thank me, slap a check for $200 in my hand, and we'd be on our way, both of us at peace. Following the grand tour, Greta handed me a brass key that unlocked the front door. Was Harold's old key, she said, before assuring me that she'd be out of the house by 10 p.m. and return no later than 6:30 a.m. It's a deal, I said, and that was the last time I ever spoke to her. Prior to the investigation, around 7:30, I met a friend of mine for dinner, one of the general partners of the Spook Stalkers. I knew him very well. Lorenzo, over here. I called out as he glanced over the restaurant, looking for me. Over here. Once he found me, he weaved around a few tables and dodged a few patrons before he made it to the booth where I was sitting. How are you, Goodwin? Did you order? Waiting for you. He slipped his jacket off, grabbed a menu. What do they got here? You meet with the client. Sure did. I think I'll just get a burger. What'd she say? That her husband was a college graduate, loved playing gin rummy, and died of lung cancer 3 years ago. Also, he's alive and still lives in the house, but only at night. I'm shaking in my boots, he said sarcastically. Where's the waiter? I can give you the address if you want to stop by. Sounds good, he nodded. A waiter took our orders, and the elderly couple in the booth adjacent to ours paid their bill and left. Lorenzo was thumbing the screen of his phone, scrolling through a news feed when I asked him, what do I tell her? Who? The client. Yeah, you mean? He set his phone aside. What do you mean? Say I find something dangerous in the house. Carbon monoxide, mold, whatever. What do I tell her? That she needs to leave even though her husband's there. Lorenzo took a moment, losing himself in thought, before he said, tell her it's the devil, that the devil is in her house, and using her husband as a front. Think she'll buy it. Of course, she'll buy anything. Devil is a bit too much, no? Evil spirit then. Lorenzo sipped his drink. Her house is full of evil spirits. To that, we both drank. By the time I got back to the Keaton residence, both the moon and sun were gone. Nothing but a blanket of cloud cover remained. I climbed out my car and walked across the stone path leading to the porch, armed with Harold's key and a DSLR camera. The night ahead of me was poised to be long and tedious, yet I wasted no time entering the house, where I was immediately struck by a low sound, a thud. Instinctively, I got the DSLR and started filming, hoping to use the footage as proof that the Keaton residence was indeed a haven for spirits, evil spirits, that and a few carefully crafted lies would seal the deal. Your house is haunted, Mrs. Keaton. Here's the video evidence to prove it, I would say after finding out what really caused the thud. But that plan went out the window as soon as I stepped into the living room. Blood splattered across the carpet. There were only a few specks at first glance, but with each step, the blood trail grew thicker and denser before reaching a head at the polyester couch. Bright blue cushions stained dark red. The metallic smell made me gag. I spun around, aiming the camera ahead, my head swimming. That's when I heard it again. Another thud, then a voice. It was hushed, almost a mumble. What it said I couldn't discern, but it was clearly said in a state of panic, and if not for the blood, I wouldn't have felt such sheer terror. Nevertheless, I continued onward, the wood floors rasping under my boots, and the moment I entered the hallway, I froze right where I stood. 3 men, one tall, one short, the final one somewhere in between, all 3 of them standing 10 feet away, 6 glaring, unflinching eyes, going as wide as they could at the sight of me, and at their feet, a dead body bundled up in garbage bags. Then me, staring dumbly at them, the DSLR aimed in their direction. No more than 10 seconds later, I blurted out, without thinking, damn, and in that instant, the small man charged at me with a crowbar, breaking the tableau. But still I couldn't move, couldn't even take a single step backwards. Immobilized by fear, I hardly noticed when the short man slapped the camera out of my hand and swung the crowbar toward my head. Everything went black. They were heaving me down the basement stairs. When I awoke, by the grace of God, none of them noticed. The short one had me by the feet, while the tall one carried me by my torso, his arms hooked under mine. They took careful, gradual steps to the bottom, where they set me down beside the garbage-bagged body. Never once did I twitch, draw breath, or give them any reason to think they didn't kill me. Come on, I'm not staying here another minute, the short one snarled. Agreed, the tall one said as they climbed the stairs together. When they fell out of earshot and slammed the basement door shut, I sucked in the stale air and rolled onto my side. I felt the gash in my head, my fingernails scraping up skin and blood. Then I looked over at the dead body next to me. Even though I knew what I'd find underneath, I stretched the polyethylene until it tore to reveal the bloodied face of Greta Keaton, her final expression of terror frozen in place like the rest of her. And before the lump in my throat gave way to tears, I saw him, Harold Keaton, standing by the only window in the room, lit by the moonlight. The one thing I'd been denying during this whole enterprise now stood before me, as real and as tangible as the house itself. My jaw went slack, my heart skipped a beat. He never spoke, only gestured. I rose up to my feet, regaining my balance as he trained a finger at me. It took a moment for me to figure out what he was pointing at, the toolbox behind me. Harold the handyman's toolbox. I hurried over to it, flipping it open to reveal a stockpile of wrenches and screwdrivers within. My head was starting to pulse, and I could still hear the 3 burglars rustling around upstairs. I took the least worn screwdriver, its tip slotted and sharp, then hopped up the stairs 2 steps at a time. It was locked, the basement door. From what I could tell, it was bolted shut. Forged iron perhaps. I wasn't getting out of there without breaking it down. And hearing the 3 burglars scamper around, I stayed put lest they discovered I was still alive. Even with an ear pressed to the door, their voices remained faint and low. Like a well-oiled machine, they hurried from room to room, clearing them of any valuables they found along the way. Find anything in that drawer. You think this'll be worth anything? Did we check all the bedrooms? Never once did I think of intervening. The game was 3-on-1, and they'd have my ass before I'd get the chance to have one of theirs. But when there was a knock at the front door, things quickly changed. "SH, is someone at the door?" one of them muttered. They stood in silence for a moment, as did I. Just as we began to think nothing of it, there were 3 more knocks. Then a muffled voice, "Goodwin." I recognized it immediately as Lorenzo, there to help me with the investigation as promised. At first it seemed the burglars would wait him out, hoping he'd go away eventually. But Lorenzo was a good friend, a loyal one at that, and he wasn't one to leave his friend alone, and without help. So he entered the house, unaware of what lied therein. He got no more than 1, 2, 3 steps before the floor creaked and the burglars jumped him. In the ensuing grapple, they upended furniture, knocked over lamps, slammed into the walls. Lorenzo wouldn't go down without fighting, so I did what any good friend like him would do. I kicked the basement door down and went to help my friend. The screwdriver gripped tight in my fist. I hurried around the corner, my shoulders hunched, and there they were. "Shit, he's alive," the short burglar yelled as his eyes landed on mine. He and the tall one had Lorenzo pinned at the arms, allowing the third a clear shot to his abdomen. The third punched holes into Lorenzo's chest with a butcher's knife, draining him of blood as the short one rushed at me once again. There was no thought, no plan, no nothing. I lunged the screwdriver forward, aiming for nothing in particular when the short one came within reach of me. The screwdriver impaled him through the neck, its tip sticking out of his nape. I released the tool, unable to pull it out of his throat as he collapsed then and there. Within seconds, he was dead. "Calvin," the third one cried out. I didn't have the opportunity to process what I just did, because the tall one was already diving towards me and bringing me to the floor, slamming my head into the hardwood. And when I looked up, I found myself staring down the barrel of a gun. "Don't shoot him, don't shoot him," the third burglar ordered the tall one. "Son of a gun deserves worse." Unsurprisingly, they dragged me back down to the basement, where they took turns kicking me in the head and torso for 10 minutes. When it was finally over, the tall one held me at gunpoint while the third one pulled himself together, massaging his head, wiping his tears away. I lay on the ground, coiled up near Greta's corpse. God damn you, he grumbled. Finally, he turned to me, red-faced and panting. "You don't know who you just killed, do you?" All I could feel was pain. Every slight movement was a jab to my nerves, a never-ending torrent of hurt. So I kept quiet, trying not to put too much strain on my body. "You don't know, do you? Piece of trash. Doesn't even know." He dropped to a knee, got in my ear, lowered his voice to a growl, and said, "You killed my brother, my best friend." I couldn't help but answer back, "In spite of the pain, you killed mine." Salted tears rolled down and around my swollen face, stinging my various wounds, and the third burglar shamelessly began laughing, devoid of any and all sanity. He laughed until he cried, and he laughed until he jumped to his feet and said, "Don't go anywhere." And I didn't. I let him head back upstairs. I let the tall burglar hold the gun on me. My fate sealed. I let it happen. I wondered what my family'd think, what Lorenzo's family would think. Maybe I'd come back like Harold and explain myself. Maybe, maybe not. Time would tell, and it did when I saw Greta. From behind the tall burglar, she appeared. Greta Keaton, dead but alive. I sat up, my eyes going as wide as they could under their swellings. "You going somewhere?" the tall burglar asked. He didn't think to turn around to see what I was seeing. Instead, he grew agitated, tightening his grip on the gun. "What are you doing?" he hissed. Greta was upon him now, and her spirit stepped into his, the two of them becoming one within him. And the evil look on the burglar's face began to soften, his grip on the gun relaxing, as he lowered his arm and smiled. It wasn't malicious, nor was it mocking. Put simply, it was reassuring. "I'm not here to hurt you," that smile said. "You can trust me." Then, as if on cue, the third burglar marched in. He was ambling down the stairs, taking his time, blissfully unaware that he was no longer in control. When he reached the basement floor, he revealed a glistening pair of scissors in his hand, snipping them just to taunt me. "Hold him down," he ordered. But the tall one did no such thing. "Jace," the third one hissed. "Little help." But that help never came to him. Instead, the tall one turned to face him, his eyes narrowed, his posture rigid. He raised the gun, taking aim. "What the hell?" The third one mumbled as his friend shot him point blank in the head, ending his life from behind the brilliance of a muzzle flash and the deafening crack of a gunshot. I flinched, startled by the sound, while the third burglar's dead body flumped to the cement. When my eyes went back to the tall one, he was staring back and smiling. Then, without a moment's notice, he stuck the gun against the roof of his mouth and fired. The bullet turned his head into a blood spout, and there, standing in his place while his lifeless body crumpled, was Greta. And there, standing by her side, was Harold, a uniformed patrol officer. Was feeling my neck for a pulse when I was once again jolted awake. Got alive when one of the neighbors had heard the gunshots. They put me on a stretcher and carried me through a carnival of red and blue lights on the way to an ambulance. 10 miles later, I was handcuffed to my hospital bed and shown a radiograph. There was a hair-thin crack running down the X-ray. My skull was fractured. Surgery wasn't necessary, thank God. A month and a half the examiner gave me. One day, a month and a half down the road, you'll be the old you again. That day will come, and I shudder at the thought of it. I killed Louis Finley, Calvin Finley, and Jason Dallas after ending up in the wrong place at the wrong time. I explained to investigators. Explained the dead homeowner. She was a client. Explained the other dead body. He was my friend. Explain. My saving grace was the DSLR footage I had captured earlier in the night. The 3 burglars, all 3 deer in the headlights, caught red-handed disposing of Greta Keaton's corpse. The case against me promptly went downhill before the district attorney finally dropped it all together. In 3 months, when the lease term is up, spook stalkers will be dead and gone like the Keatons, because it cannot function without the lie. And knowing what I know, knowing that the lie is in fact the truth, I cannot bear it anymore. Maybe ghosts aren't meant to be hunted. Maybe I'm not meant to hunt them. Either way, I'm a fraud, a liar, a scam artist, and I can't be trusted with the truth. The night after I was hospitalized, the senior detective assigned to my case was asking for my side of the story. "In your professional opinion, was the house haunted?" she asked with a snide grin. Maybe not." "Well, did you find any ghosts?" I replied. "There's no such thing as ghosts." I am on the spectrum, somewhere between Mozart and being unable to tie my shoes. Conversations don't come easy. The answer to the question, the empathetic reassurance, the witty quip, all under my head 10 seconds delayed. So I'll nod, or say okay, and smile, anything to get through a conversation. But being boring doesn't help you make friends. It's different on the internet. The late 90s was the heyday of chat rooms. Remember IRC? I met my best friends there because I could take time to respond. I could think of that witty quip to reflect my personality or express something heartfelt. It liberated me from my shell and shyness, and that's where I met the love of my life too. Look, I won't bore you with the story of an internet romance. I still get nervous when I remember the day Lynn drove 200 miles to see me. I was sure that when she met me, my boring personality would extinguish her fondness. But by some miracle, that's not what happened. When we married, there were 3 people at our wedding, all from IRC chat rooms. My parents, who had been ashamed of me and kicked me out when I turned 18, didn't show up. My best man was my friend Juan, who I bonded with after hundreds of hours on IRC. Having all the people who I cared about and who cared about me in one place made it the best day of my life. I'd never felt so appreciated, loved, and connected. Today, I'm alone again, and I come to you with a warning. Don't do what I did. Don't pray to gods you have no business praying to. I was raised Pentecostal, a Protestant movement that emphasizes speaking in tongues. Now, as someone with a disability who had enough trouble speaking with one tongue, I couldn't comprehend what it meant to be possessed by the Holy Spirit. I couldn't explain it to you if I tried. Imagine a church filled with people bopping as if possessed. and fake speaking Swahili. I affirmed my atheism the day my parents tossed me onto the streets. I was not unsure if God existed. I was certain God didn't exist. In school one day, I'd watched a documentary on the after effects of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. These people, called Hibakusha, suffered something uniquely inhuman, destructive, and evil. Many of them had burns and sicknesses from the nuclear radiation that had literally corrupted their DNA, their humanity. Many died in ways far worse than being eviscerated in the explosion. Imagine the cells of your skin dividing with altered DNA that turns your flesh into a translucent mush. To die because the fabric of your being has been corrupted to my strange mind seemed so unholy, so ungodly that in a world where such things happen, God couldn't exist. So why did I pray each night to a different God until things got so out of control I wish I'd never met my wife or used IRC. It started the day she left me. We'd loved each other for 2 decades and been married for 1. I won't get into how long marriage takes its toll. The passion dried out years ago and decayed into an assumed comfort. Now I thought that was how it was supposed to be, but as I often realized, I thought differently from others. Because one day, she left without warning, gone, leaving only a note laid on a stack of divorce papers. The note mentioned that she had met someone else. Online, of course. They'd been chatting for a while. She'd met him once already, and now she was going to be with him. Great. Though our marriage wasn't all sparks and heat, I thought we were content. I felt peace in my heart and connected to her. We didn't have kids, but we were enough for each other, or at least, she was enough for me. The day she left, I poured myself a glass of chocolate milk and waited on the living room sofa for her to come home. I couldn't believe she was gone. I waited for the door to open and for her to burst through with a shopping bag and talking about how bad traffic was or how the neighbors had remodeled their porch. I waited until 1 a.m. before I built up enough despair to call her phone, but it was off. I sent her emails, but she never replied. The next day, I stayed home from work because the despair and loneliness pounding through my body paralyzed and sickened me. I couldn't eat or even sip water. I curled up into a ball on the living room floor and shivered until I passed out. It was Juan who found me, unresponsive, and called an ambulance. I woke up in the hospital. Apparently, on top of my heartbreak, I had a vitamin D deficiency that had contributed to my ill state. The doctor prescribed tablets, told me to go outside more, and sent me home. Juan let me stay with him and his wife for a few days. He'd married a Muslim girl and had converted to be with her. That made him the only Muslim Korean I knew of. While staying at his home, I found a copy of the Holy Quran in English. I spent a few hours reading, hoping that it would enlighten me, that some truth would burst forth and save me from the base despair that crippled me. Instead, I read a verse that made me angry, and whosoever believeth in God, he guideth his heart, and God is knower of all things. Why wasn't I a believer? Why didn't God guide me? Was I not good enough for him to guide? I then read another verse that made me even angrier. It is who sent down peace of reassurance into the hearts of the believers that they might add faith unto their faith. Something in me snapped when I read that verse. It seemed that God was choosing people to believe, and not the other way around. That was unfair. If this world was a test, as Christians also claim, then surely God should allow us to choose whether to believe. Later that day, I went home and read about Islam. I learned that to become a Muslim, all I had to do was recite some words. So I recited them to prove to God that it was my choice, not his, to believe. I now realize that this was a distraction from the pain, and that the real pain was coming. I learned how to pray like a Muslim. Before each prayer, I would do the cleansing ritual by washing my face, hands, and feet. I'd then follow the steps for the prayer, from standing to bowing to prostration. I even learned the recitals in Arabic. I truly felt reborn, and with this fresh way of life seemed to be turning a new page. I met people at the mosque who were kind and didn't seem to judge me for being slow. But at the end of the day, I still came home to an empty house, and I still didn't really believe in God. Soon, the prayers became a burden, and without faith in my heart, I felt awkward going to the mosque and being among true believers. God really hadn't chosen me, and the hole that ached in my heart when Lynn left only grew, despite how much I covered it. It was a gaping chasm, and I felt its emptiness in every cell of my body. It affirmed to me how meaningless the world was, and how there was no God. The Hibakusha, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, must have felt the same evisceration of spirit when faced with their doom. They say religion is like a drug. Well, I was in withdrawal, so I moved on to other religions. I bought dozens of holy texts. I even went to the local community college and sat in on some religion classes. It filled the void temporarily. One day, I went to the mall. I saw a couple my age, holding hands and smiling while window shopping. I remembered when Lynn and I walked through this mall, doing the same thing. I knew with my social skills, I'd never meet someone who loved me like her again. If miracles were proof of God, then the greatest miracle I'd ever witnessed was her accepting and loving me. At that moment, I prayed to God, if you're there, bring Lynn back to me. This is where things get strange. And you may not believe me, because when I recount it, I don't believe myself. I opened the mailbox one chilly autumn morning before heading to work. Beneath a pile of junk mail was a brown hardcover book. It was not in an envelope, so someone had dropped it there. The cover was devoid of any text or images. I didn't think much of it and left it on the kitchen table, where it got buried under junk mail and bills. When I came home from work that day, Lynn was sitting on my couch. "You didn't even change the locks," she said. I stared at her. I'm slower than most, so it takes me a while to respond with something other than yeah or okay. "Look, I only came to get the divorce papers. Remember? Did you ever sign them?" In my mind, it was as if Lynn was dead. To see her again was a miracle akin to Jesus bringing Lazarus back to life. It was as if my prayer had been answered with a sign of God. "I'll need those papers within the week. My lawyer will pick them up. This may be the last time you will see me." Lynn was about to walk out the door when I finally thought of what to say. "Did I not make you happy? You did once, but that all changed the day I met him. Come back to me." "Lynn, I can't go on without you. As much as you deserve happiness, I do too." She headed for the door. "Lynn, don't go." I stood in front of the door to block her from leaving. "Please talk to me. I'm done talking. There's no way you will ever make me happy. You're not normal, John. You're all bottled up. When we first met, you were different. You had a side to you that was so aware, so alive. Who do you show that side to now, if not me?" I couldn't figure out how to answer that. In my view, I hadn't changed, and it was her who had become withdrawn in the months before she left. Upon realizing I wasn't going to say anything, Lynn left. Now that I think back on that moment, it was my first true spiritual experience. While I was stuck in my usual haze, I was also in awe that she had come back. That the only woman who had accepted me and made me whole was still real, standing in my house, and that maybe it was possible for her to be with me again. I began praying every night, not in any particular way, but privately to God. Sometimes I'd get on my knees like a Pentecostal, or hold my hands up the way Muslims do, whatever seemed right, and I'd always ask, repeatedly, for God to bring her back to me. A few days later, her lawyer visited. I knew he was coming, and I had prepared a few things to say. "I'd like to meet with Lynn." "That's not going to happen. She doesn't want to talk to you." "Then why did she come to my house?" "To remind you to sign the papers." I tried to find her phone number. It took some cajoling of mutual friends, something I didn't know I was capable of, but I did get her number. Calling it was useless. As soon as she realized it was me, she blocked my number. When I called her with a new number, she threatened to file a restraining order. I even found out her new address, an ideal neighborhood on an affluent street with cherry trees. The house was twice the size of mine, so whoever she had found must have been twice as rich. Sometimes after work, I'd drive by, but I wasn't going to knock on the door. It was not our house. I didn't belong there, and in my mind, our relationship could not be saved there. My attempts to reach her were fruitless, and I was in despair. Maybe she was never coming back. That hole in my heart that whispered I was utterly alone drained me of hope. I curled up in our bathtub and turned on the shower. When I was a child, I'd do this on awful days, like when other kids would torment me for being dull. The water hitting your face is like welcoming the rain after a blistering day. But now, it just reminded me of all the times I felt safe and comfortable, reassured that no matter what awful thing happened, I always had Lynn to come home to. She made me feel accepted and gave me a place to belong. Then she ripped that from me. God, let us be together again. I repeated it again and again until my skin became clammy with wetness and cold. Days passed quickly. Her lawyer would come by and I'd insist that I wouldn't sign the divorce papers without seeing my wife. I was told that if I didn't sign, the court would just divorce us anyway. At the time, I didn't care about the terms of the divorce. I just wanted to talk to Lynn and win her back, so it made no difference what the court did if I could delay the divorce as long as possible. It was at this time that, in my downward spiral, I began to pray to different gods. If the one God, the Abrahamic God or monotheist God or whatever you want to call him, didn't exist enough to help me, then maybe others did. Buddha seemed different enough from the Abrahamic God, though he wasn't exactly godlike. I drove to the nearest Buddhist temple. I lit some incense and stuck it in a mound before a gleaming golden statue of Buddha and prayed, "Oh Buddha, bring Lynn and I back together again." The next night, I went to a Hindu temple. They have so many gods in their religion, and each temple is devoted to a different god. This one had an almost cartoonish statue of the goddess Shakti, who they call the Great Divine Mother. I put some sandalwood paste on my face and placed 9 flowers before her statue in a circle. I then held 2 incense sticks and prayed, "Oh Shakti, bring Lynn back to me." As the weeks went by, I ran out of organized religions. I started with the cults, but in America, most cults are Christian-based, so I'd end up praying to Abraham's God again, and the ones which don't worship God worship his nemesis. Praying to Satan felt wrong, but I said my prayer just in case. "Satan, if you're there, let Lynn and I be one again." I then moved to obscure gods. I read books and articles to make sure I got the prayer rituals right, but Ahura Mazda, god of light for the Zoroastrians, didn't answer my prayer. Neither did Akalpurek nor Amaterasu Omikami. I went from the obscure to the dead. Jupiter, Odin, Ra, none of them cared for my desperate call. I was running out of gods, and with each failed prayer, out of hope, I woke up one morning at 4 a.m. The bare light of false dawn glowed in the sky. Birds hadn't started chirping. The world was peaceful and silent. At that moment, I realized how crazy I'd been acting. I thought about the Hippocusha, who lost their loved ones in nuclear annihilation. In this life, people suffer and die alone. God and gods don't exist. These are facts, and you either face them or escape into fantasy. I decided to read the divorce papers and hire a lawyer. While looking for the papers under a pile on the kitchen table, I found the brown book I'd received in the mail many days ago. It had a heft to it, but the leathery cover felt premium and inviting. I opened it and read the title, Prayer Book. I flipped through the pages, all empty, without word or image, except for one page at the end. This page was also without word or image, but it wasn't empty. Taped to it was an SD card, the kind used in cameras. I brought my laptop down from the bedroom and slotted it in. The SD card had one file. It contained a link to an IRC server. I had to download an IRC client, as I hadn't used the program in years. The IRC server was called Rapture 2018. And there was one channel, #prayer room. I entered it. The only one there was a user named Brother. What do you seek? What is this? Is there something your heart desires? Who are you? Can teach you how to pray. Pray to who? To X. Now before I continue, I must mention that X is not his actual name. I've changed it for your safety because I don't want you discovering this god or repeating what I was about to do. X, the only one real enough to give you what you want. What do I have to do? We'll guide you. But before you proceed, know that there is a price. Price? X will take you. Take me where? To be one with him forever. To the rapture. Rapture, another crazy teaching I remember from Pentecostal sermons. I don't mean to offend anyone who believes in it, but the thought that God would whisk us into the sky seemed more to terrify than reassure. What if I don't want to go? Then X can take what he gives. It's your choice entirely. Okay, teach me how to pray to X. Brother detailed the steps. Since you don't know X's name, they won't work for you. Still, I advise you not to try. 1. Begin a fast at sunrise from eating, drinking, and talking. During this period, do not let your mind dwell on anything so that you are clear-headed. 2. After sunset, travel to a secluded area, such as a desert, forest, or mountain where you can clearly see the night sky. You must arrive before midnight. 3. Lie down on your back and face the sky. Locate the constellation Perseus. Find the star Algol and concentrate on it. Repeat the name of X until you fall asleep. 4. X will visit you in a dream. He will appear as someone you know and trust. Tell him exactly what you want. 5. Within 6 days, you will see the result of your prayer. I waited for Sunday. The fasting part wasn't hard because I didn't have an appetite. My father used to take my big brother and me to this forest camping spot. One of the few happy memories I have of my childhood. I drove there a few hours before midnight. Now I must explain something. When I was 12, my big brother was killed in a car accident. Unlike me, he was a social butterfly and high achiever at school. And pretty much everything he did. I think losing him was too much for my parents because it meant I was the only legacy they would ever have, and they never forgave me for that. Anyway, I thought I was going to see Juan in the dream, but X took the form of my big brother. I didn't even realize it was a dream. As I lay down in the forest in my sleeping bag, a man approached. It was my big brother, still 17 years old and rocking a leather jacket, looking just like on the day he died. At first, I didn't want to talk to him, afraid that it would break my fast. The hunger, thirst, and autumn cold made it hard for me to process what was going on. But when he asked me what I desired, I didn't even have to think of a response. Brother, I wish I was like you. That's what came out of my mouth, because that's how I'd felt my entire life. Jealous of him, of his abilities, and of the love my parents showered on him. My brother smiled at me, unnaturally wide. I'd never seen him smile like that, as if his cheek muscles were being pulled by a string. That's when, in my slow brain, I realized what was going on. I'd said the wrong prayer, and then he was gone. Chirping birds and howling forest animals woke me. I wiggled out of my sleeping bag and drove home. The first thing I did after chugging a pitcher of water and slurping a can of tuna was to log onto that IRC server, but I kept getting the server could not be found error. I searched for the server, but got no relevant results. Nothing happened or changed in the following days, until 6 days later, which coincidentally was the court date set for Lynn and me to divorce. Dressed in my best suit, I arrived at the courtroom. Something had changed. I felt a power deep in my being that had always been there as a shadow, but never fully realized. I felt confident. On top of that, I had a clarity of mind that made the words in my brain roll off my tongue. But I did not have Lynn. That day, Lynn never showed, and since she was the initiating party, the judge couldn't proceed with the divorce. Our marriage stood. Her lawyer was just as puzzled as me, but suggested that it was cold feet. I drove to her house. The trees in her yard were laden with cherries. As usual, curtains covered the windows. Did she ever get any sunlight? It took 5 minutes of waiting by the door before I mustered the courage to knock. Would her lover answer, this witty, rich, and handsome man who'd stolen her from me, the person Lynn deserved, who would make her happy the rest of her life? I knocked. Despite the newfound confidence, my nerves had me shivering during the wait. It was Lynn who answered the door. How beautiful she was, and my mind, as youthful and exuberant as the day we met. She smiled. I missed you so much, my dear John. Her hug was like the rain hitting your face after a hot day. A prayer answered. When, let's go home. Come inside first. I want you to meet him. I don't want to meet him, Lynn, but I promise I'll love you more than he ever could. I've changed. I can be the man you want me to be, the man you deserve. So please, come home. John, you must meet him. He's the reason we can be together again. I didn't know what she meant. Lynn grabbed my hand and dragged me inside. Once the door shut, I found out this was not a house. It was a temple to X. The place was filled with people, all on their knees, as still as statues. They stared at the ceiling and recited the name of X. Something odd on their faces sent a shudder through me. Their eyes had no pupils. What the hell is happening here, Lynn? The rapture, my love. As if in slow motion, the worshippers rose to their feet and turned to look at us with their blank white eyes. Lynn, we have to go. I grabbed her and tried to open the front door, but it was stuck. We made a promise, didn't we, John, that when the time came, we would go with X. No, I don't want to. I just want to be with you. I want to go back to the way things were, when we were happy. But that's not what you want, John. You were never truly happy with me because you were never happy with yourself. Isn't that why you prayed too? The worshippers pointed at me and opened their mouths, unnaturally wide, as if pulled by strings. They approached. I kicked the front door. I kicked and kicked until it flung open, but Lynn was no longer next to me. Lynn. Without taking their eyes off me, the worshippers pointed at an open door. It led to a dim basement. I rushed down to look for my wife. As I entered, the door slammed shut, leaving me in darkness. The stench of rotting flesh and blood filled my nose. I turned on my cell phone flashlight. Bodies all over the floor, worms crawling through eye sockets, rats digging through intestines. I tried to hold back the vomit, but it spewed out of me and onto the wall. Lynn, he's here, John. I walked toward her voice, careful not to step on the bodies. At the end of the room, there was a raised surface with a stone slab in the middle. Upon that slab was another body. This was a sacrificial altar. Turn off the light, John. He doesn't like light. The body shook. Someone bit it. Flesh was chomped on and blood gushed. Whatever was eating the body slowly stood until it was so tall its head hit the ceiling. Its eyes were too big for its head. It had no nose, only a wide mouth with fangs. Flesh and blood dripped off its mouth as it smiled at me. Lynn, if you still love me, let's go now. I couldn't see Lynn. I had to run. I burst through the basement door and ran outside. Once in the car, I mashed the accelerator. In that panic, I must have crashed into another car because I woke up in a hospital bed with a concussion and broken bones. Juan, my emergency contact since my wife left, sat next to me. Maybe it was the concussion from the airbag smashing my head, but I felt slow again, unclear, and uncertain about what to say and what was even in my mind. Juan explained what happened. A few hours after I was taken to the hospital, the police responded to a call about that house. When they arrived, everyone in the house was dead. They had killed themselves as part of some ritual. Even worse, each body had been partially eaten, as if by an animal. I stayed in the hospital for several weeks, relying on Juan for updates on the investigation. The police would never find the IRC server, despite the information I gave them. The SD card and the prayer book didn't lead them anywhere. But the strangest part was how everyone in the house died. Their hearts just stopped, without any trace of substances that could cause it, as if their souls had been whisked away into rapture, but their bodies had stayed to be consumed by rats and worms and wild animals, as the police claimed. Only I knew the truth, though I didn't tell anyone because I barely believed it myself. The most painful moment of my life was being wheeled to the hospital morgue to identify my wife's dead body. A dozen bodies lay on tables, missing half a face or a thigh or some stomach. Lynn lay there with a hole in her chest that had been sewed up. Her heart and lungs had been eaten. I squeezed her hand and cried. I said out loud, "Whoever is listening, I'll do anything, just bring her back to me." I had a dream the night before I left the hospital. I was camping with my big brother and father in the forest. We were laughing and eating s'mores by a fire. Then my father started talking about the constellation Perseus. He showed us how to find the star Algol. If you think of Perseus as holding a severed head, Algol is always the brightest star on it. While my father got on his knees and recited the name of X, my brother whispered to me, "She tasted like cherries. One day I'll taste you too." His eyes had no pupils, and his face twitched into an unnatural smile. I don't know why Lynn prayed to X or what she prayed for, but her desperation must have led her to him. Maybe she was unhappy, maybe it was my fault. Maybe at some point I stopped being true with her and pushed her away, and she turned to X for an answer. Anyway, I live alone now, and I'm still slow and uncertain of the future, but like the Hibakusha, I survived. And whether that's worse than death, only life will tell. In the end, I think my faithlessness saved me. I don't believe in God, but maybe there are beings that hear our desperate prayers, and maybe it's better if they don't answer us at all.